I'm calling this meeting of the Nantucket Historic District Commission to order.
Oh, look who rambled in.
Hello.
Oh, back from her religious retreat. Were you at some saint's place?
St. John.
St. John.
Oh, there you go.
So,
Thank God for the Caribbean.
we are beginning the meeting at 4:38. Present John McLaughlin, Christine Glazer, dear Diane Coombs. How are you feeling, Diane?
Oh, I'm feeling much
You look much better. Yeah.
I've recovered from whatever
Look good.
it was that attacked me.
Val Oliver, Matthew Kunert, and back from his religious retreat, Abby
Yes.
Camp,
John
Ray Cole.
has a
Oh.
goatee.
Did I mention you first?
Yeah.
And John McLaughlin.
Everybody knows it.
There you are. Okay. So now, I would like to make a couple of very fine revisions to our new business layout here. It all has to do with town council. So what I would like someone to propose is that we take item 5, which is about the guidelines and the work group, which does not necessarily need to involve town council, and move that to the end.
So moved.
Thank you, Diane. All those in favor of Diane's motion?
Aye.
Now, items 12 and 14, which I would like to have town council's involvement in, I would like to have moved just following what is now labeled as item 8, which is about zoning and HDC. All of those will have the participation of town council.
Okay, so 12 and 14.
12 and 14 will move
Move
to
to
follow
below
zoning and HDC jurisdictional clarification.
Right.
Okay?
So moved that.
Thank you. All those in favor of Diane's motion?
Aye.
Did you have a question
Yes,
on
I
that?
do,
What
Chairman
is that?
Paul.
Yes.
With regard to building with Nantucket in mind,
Yes.
I actually did have a couple of questions for town council because there
Oh.
seems to be some issue with regarding the establishment of the work group and whether or not we are obligated to advertise, or how informal can we be? Do we need to be off
Okay.
the
So why don't we,
just?
can someone motion to reopen
Reopen.
and to, all those in favor of reopening?
Number 5.
Aye.
Aye. We are going to leave item 5 in its current location. Yes, so that we can get a town council opinion on that one. All those in favor of Diane's motion?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great, thank you. So, with all that out of the way, can I have someone to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Thank you. All those in favor of Diane's motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Now, public comment, anyone? Hearing none, we will move on to old business. I need to recuse from this, and,
I have Mullen in on this.
oh, okay.
Yes, you did. I did, with the video, which you could hardly hear. It was so bad. And I have all the meeting notes also.
For everyone? Okay, John has a question.
Okay, and under this here, all right, we voted to have an organization meeting.
Yes.
Why are we going to have an application?
Because, okay.
At the meeting last Thursday, remember we had new business last Tuesday? And we didn't finish on Tuesday night, so some of it got bumped to Thursday. This was one of the applications. We heard Lisa's application, and we all recognized that we were not going to all be here if it went past today. So we decided to let it come back today, since it was a new business that had been bumped to Thursday.
Hey, John.
Thank you.
Next Tuesday, Christine is away, Val is away, and Matthew is away. There's going to be a very short board next Tuesday.
Is Abby back yet?
I don't think so. There she is. We're all straight on that? All right. So I'm recusing.
You don't have to step away. Diane, you take the.
Sitting voting members McLaughlin, Glazer, Oliver, Cooner, and Diane.
All right.
So last week, for the people that are sitting, who I believe is just Diane added? Yeah. We presented building, so I can send this, because I only brought my set, it's been out in the file. These were like context pictures that everybody looked at, and then also, pictures of the site for visibility. So I think in general, if I remember, there were very favorable comments. We did not have a full-size set of drawings, and that was the issue. Everybody was looking at 11 by 17 drawings. And, there was not a lot. There was a request to change the front door to panel and sidelights, which we did. That was basically the only request that came forward.
And I think maybe a couple of windows or one window.
There was one that you wanted to shift, and
Yeah,
then we
that-
thought, which I can shift. I thought you had said, well, that doesn't look like it's going to be terribly visible. I think the second driveway, Diane, just so that you know, is getting closed up. This
Right.
photo, this
Yeah.
is getting planted over, and the rest of the vegetation is pretty thick. Has a 30-foot front yard setback. So there's, the intention is to have a lot of vegetation between it and the road. And then we also showed the neighbor looking back where they have tons of vegetation blocking the house.
When this was presented, as I was telling Christine, several years ago, that we reviewed this house on Gosnell, 20 Gosnell.
Yeah.
And were you there?
I don't think so.
Who did it back then? It was
When
like-
Lee Dunn did it?
I don't remember, I just remember going, because we spent a lot of time on it, because the house was in good condition and all that jazz, but it was decided that moving it was
No, that was
virtually
the neighbor.
impossible.
That was the neighbor. That's 20, which is now built, and I have a picture of it. That's the Bresslers.
Right, but this was too.
This house is very,
This is you come to the corner and turn to the left, going down Gosnell. And
I don't think that this was brought before. We certainly didn't bring an
you
application
did,
before you.
somebody did, it may not very well.
it's
but
an
didn't.
oddball
But
house.
you couldn't cut it up
Do we have any more
Because
pictures
of
of the existing?
Yeah.
because of the irregularity of it.
Yeah,
So
I think-
anyway, it was
yeah.
just curious. So, these are the new plans for it, right?
Yes.
And
So is it my imagination, or does the front look different?
It hasn't changed, other than this is what I had with me the last time, other than the front door.
May I see this?
Yep.
Because I feel like I'm hallucinating.
it's east elevation, right? Is the set.
No, I think,
Yeah, and it's because the house is
so
in a,
this is what we looked at last week. And that's why the front looks so different.
Why does it look different?
I don't know, the first thing I saw this time, because of the front door, is the four ganged windows
Right.
above the front door.
I like the old front door better.
And the columns seem at a strange spacing surrounding the front door.
I think probably too, because we didn't have the
Right.
full size, it might be an illusion, that it
So
looks
I didn't,
different.
it does look different, because now the columns look like they're spaced too far apart.
At the front door.
Yeah.
At the front door.
Well, they could certainly be brought in.
Do you want to start?
No, well, I did, didn't I? I jumped
Yeah.
right in. No, I'll wait.
No, you start. I insist you start.
First. So, I mean, that to me is what's most glaring from the get-go, is the front. And I guess Truthfully, because of the way you have the columns down below spaced around the front door, I prefer to see 3 ganged windows up top there, not 4. And those columns brought in, but
Yeah, I think with the old front door, it actually
Yes.
filled the wall a little
Yeah.
bit more, which I actually like.
no,
I like the old door. I mean, I prefer the old door, but it actually gave,
yeah. Well, it was wider, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It took up more space. I think those are my only comments for now, Diane.
That's it, and then you sound,
Yeah.
okay.
I think,
What did you say about the columns? They should be further cut or closer?
Closer in.
They're not as evenly spaced
Yeah, the spacing needs to change. And I'd like to see less 3 ganged windows on top, not 4.
So what are you thinking of saying?
I liked the house. I like that it's a gambrel. It's similar in style to the neighbor, with a wood roof that really, mitigates the impact. It doesn't have. Does it have corner boards, Lisa, or is it a cottage corner?
we do have corner boards shown at this point.
On the dormers, though, you don't. So
No,
that's
right.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, only on the, below the gambrel.
Right. I didn't really have any concerns about it.
Alrighty.
Oh, the decking, that's what it was.
Matt, how about you?
Yeah.
I
John
agree
mentioned
with
that.
Val. I don't have a lot of concerns. I feel that it's mostly a successful design and appropriate for its location. I am reminded that there was a concern about the decking that was brought up at the last meeting, and that there's much more decking than is normally allowed. I was just wondering how you plan to respond to that concern.
I think, I thought I was sort of responding by virtue of the fact that I don't think it's really visible. But I think that's what I'm
Decking
thinking
is
about it.
what,
I mean, the length of it I understand, calculating the sides, I don't really understand calculating that in since they're cut into roofs, but it's a little different than if you had a Tom Nevers deck that did not have the roofs. So I thought because of the lack of visibility that was an issue.
But there is decking, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is decking on some of the visible facades, like the west elevation, for example, has decking, which is visible from Decking Street.
Yes. Now, if I cut that into a roof and reduce that decking a little bit, is that an option?
If that has an impact on your numbers,
It would have an impact on the numbers.
then that might be a design solution to address the board's concern.
I think that's John.
John has his calculations.
Yeah.
Is he ready to go? Johnny, are you ready to?
Yeah, all right. Have you made any changes in the decks?
No,
Okay, that's my problem.
I know.
The calculations, you have 66 feet of decking now. With the new, you have 93. You gotta take 27 feet out of this somewhere. Which is not, it's your problem, not mine, but there should have been some reaction to this.
Well, I
Because
think,
everybody else has to answer to it.
no, I understand. I was thinking because of the lack of visibility that it wouldn't be as much of an issue. And
On that point,
if you
on-
measure the length of the deck, I think you measure the sides too.
Yeah, all right, do the
Because
whole,
I
all four
sort of
sides.
feel like the length is the deck,
All
the
right,
depth.
now, the visibility, I won't back up. And you go to Tuppence property, you can see air back of all them houses going down there. So your
west.
question of lack of visibility is true.
Oh, for the west side, yes, I agree, you
All
can see
four
that.
sides.
From Tuppence?
No, you see from Cosmo.
Oh, okay, well, I think there's a lot of
The
vegetation.
north?
I think that's gonna be very hard to see. There's a picture here even, with, this is the last picture, Diane. There's a lot of vegetation between the Bressler's house and this building.
Always remember, pictures are taken from the applicant's
No, but these are just,
choice, you know? Right, you
Or from
move
my car.
30 feet to the right, you can get a better view.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying when they do this viewing stuff. You know,
well,
where it is.
I think we can certainly, I think getting 27 feet out is gonna be difficult.
Well, that's their problem, and our problem is to make sure they meet the guidelines. So, something's gotta be done, so.
I think the reduction is good, I don't know that it necessarily has to conform to that.
This picture, is this the one that you're saying last, Lisa?
Yeah. That's from the neighbor, and there's a lot of vegetation in
Yeah.
between, very tall vegetation, and that would be the view from the north. And then there's another picture, the picture before that, it also is also from the north, where you're looking through all the heavy vegetation.
And that's in winter.
That's in winter. That was taken Tuesday of last week. So, I mean, I think, you know, you'll see through the vegetation, I just don't know that you'll see it's not gonna be a clear shot. I mean, you'll clearly see through the vegetation when the leaves are down. And you don't see the west from the same time that you see the north, so it's odd to tell the sides, because the deck has to have depth.
Can I add something, Diane?
Just a thought.
So on the north side where you have the two gables coming forward, why couldn't the right-hand gable be the same as the left-hand gable? That would shorten your span
Well,
of
we don't have
fencing.
the ground cover, so we'd have to just pull that porch back a little bit.
Yeah, and then the receding massing would have a smaller decking on it too.
We might, yeah, we could probably get that to work.
If you were trying to lose fencing.
In between, yeah.
And then I would maybe put a roof on either side of the deck out of the bedroom on the west. That might not get me all the way to 27, but it would certainly reduce the decking.
I think any attempt at reducing some of the decking would be much appreciated.
It has been mentioned then that the decking be, it's 27 feet over the allowance, and that the 4 windows over the front door be reduced to 3 windows over the front door. Did anybody else have any?
And the column
And the
spaces.
columns.
And the columns be a portion there. So if there isn't anything more, perhaps I could have a motion for over revisions. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Minor.
Anybody opposed? Or,
We're making a motion, she isn't, John's in favor.
yep. So that's a total of 5 votes.
Okay.
And, okay,
Thank you very much. Thanks for giving me comments tonight.
Sure, thank you.
do you want these back or do you want them to go?
You know what? I'm gonna take one step back. They already have them from the last meeting.
I know.
This
and
is
then
about
they
that
brought-
special one in front where you.
What is some of them illegal? Can you hone in on this one?
What is it?
The one that you just made a comment on?
That's it.
No,
See your
where you
husband
hone
now.
in on.
Yeah,
There he is.
You're done, right?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. So now we're on
Thank
to
you.
our new business organizational meeting. What did it say? New business. And I want, if I may, have the board's indulgence one more time on the sequencing of these things. Apparently, we have 2 members of the sign committee here, and they're on item number 4. It does not require town council's input. It's apparently going to be a very short discussion, just about implementing the procedure for this summer. And Chris needs to leave in a half an hour, and I know that some of these other items are going to take longer than that. So could we possibly have a motion to move item 4 to the head of the agenda and hear that first?
So,
Thank you. All those in favor of Diane's motion?
Aye.
Aye. Great, okay, come on up.
Thank you.
Hello. Okay, names for the record, of course.
Chris Young.
And Kevin Kuster.
So we came tonight to ask, basically, we were here about 2 years ago talking to you about the sign enforcement policies, and I think we were given good direction by town council at that time that tickets can be written, much like a parking ticket can be written. And that's what the law has allowed, and if I'm overstating that, please correct me. But the sign book itself has certain guidelines written in the back that say this is the procedure for violations. The problem that we've seen with that is that it prolongs the process where there's a notice sent, the applicant has 14 days to respond, then a second notice gets sent, they have another 14 days to respond. Due to just the administrative tasks that requires, let alone being able to actually get things to happen every 14 days, we find that the summer just vanishes and really there is no enforcement. And so, as you probably have recognized, there's a lot of violations that are just ongoing and getting no attention. So what we're hoping to do is address that by allowing the back of what's written in the back of the sign book to say that it, essentially, as the law allows, a ticket could be written if there's a violation. And we would like your input as to how that should be written, but we'd like to request an open meeting so that the process to change the sign book is followed. But basically, we need to change the sign book because the process that's written, and if somebody were to get a ticket and say, hey, you didn't follow the process, they would have a reason to have a defense that we didn't follow what the sign book says. But we feel we need to be able to react quicker to violations, especially violations that if you got a notice and you removed your sign and then 2 weeks later put the sign back up, now it's a new violation, you get the notice, it's a cat and mouse game. So there's really no enforceable solution in the back of the sign book.
So are you suggesting that there would just be one 14-day?
Well, I think we'd like your input, but essentially we think that we still want to send courtesy notices. They work effectively. Half the time people just are unaware or they get the courtesy notice and they think all of a sudden that they better do something. But there are plenty of people that don't. So
that's the first step, the courtesy notice.
The first step is typically the courtesy notice. It is the courtesy notice. We'd like to be able to go to ticketing after that if there's no response.
What's the protocol now?
The second step would be after the courtesy notice, then they would get a violation notice. There's still no ticket, it's just violation notice. So it's basically a second courtesy notice. And then after that, they would have, then they could be ticketed. And then essentially a ticket could be issued every day that the violation remains intact. There's another issue of actually who's going to write these tickets, but we're really just trying to let you know that we think the back of the book is insufficient and we need to address that. We could come back with a draft of what we think it should say, but we need to get the open meeting law or the public
We need to
hearing.
get it on the
Public hearing.
agenda to talk about.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we're finding that we're held up in 2 areas. We haven't had a body to do the notices that's being worked on, and we've had a procedure that has been cumbersome and it allows for people to sort of manipulate around and then nothing gets done. So we're hoping that by acting on some of the longer issues that have been going on with some folks for a long time now, that the word will get out that they're actually being enforced, and people will begin to pull together. So.
So just 2 things. Let me, if I may. Your intent then today is to get us to put this on one of our meeting agendas so that you'll come back again to us and with a more formalized plan of what your proposal is? Or?
Well, I think that what we need to do is have a public hearing, correct, when we want to change the sign book.
Okay.
So,
The public
Right.
hearing beyond putting it down as other
noticing it
business?
on our agenda?
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may,
you should, if you agree with the sign committee that you will consider some changes, we will need to advertise the changes. In the general bylaws of the town, there's an outline of how that needs to be handled. So we need to advertise it, you would schedule a public hearing, and you would talk about the changes that they're proposing. And I do agree with the sign committee that it is cumbersome and that it could be reduced a little bit. And we've met with them. John is working on some sign enforcement. He's already sent out some courtesy notices at the direction of the sign committee. And, we want to make this process smoother, and we want for everyone to be compliant with the sign regulations.
Okay, so, you'll advertise the changes pursuant to the bylaws. And so the changes would be, the courtesy notice stays in place, and once somebody ignores the courtesy notice, then they would be issued a ticket, and they have 14 days to respond to the ticket?
They have to pay it.
They would have to pay the
Sounds like
ticket.
probably the courtesy notice needs to be reworded in a way that informs them of what's going to happen if they don't.
Right.
Okay.
So basically,
That kind of language.
But
Would you
otherwise-
agree?
kind of combining the courtesy notice and the violation notice to one step.
Okay.
Right,
So that
because
it's
if
not-
you read this, it's like 2 months worth of,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
you remember
And that's assuming that we have somebody who's
yeah.
Every 14
because
days
You
reacting,
know that
which-
one on Old South Road, they went 2 years.
Oh, we've got violations that have gone a lot longer than that.
Yeah, but I mean,
And it's frustrating to us
Okay.
telling applicants they can't do something when
when
their
they're
neighbors
doing
are just
right.
are, so.
No,
And what is the price of the fine?
I believe it's the first fine, Dan, you have it there. It's starts very small. It gets to $300 a day after, I think, the third day.
It
Goes
doesn't
from-
it
list
doesn't
any.
say.
No.
Oh, so that's in the,
Specifically.
that's in the,
That's something that we
Is
should.
that in the
tell us.
bylaws, or is that in our?
Yep, sorry.
okay, thanks, John.
It's through the town bylaws. I believe it's $50 for the first notice, and then it goes up from there. The first set's $300. It can be as much as $300 a day. If that's
And that's run through the police department, right?
Now,
Sorry,
I know.
Leslie, what do you have to say
So,
about
Mr. Chairman, in chapter 124 of the general bylaws.
it? Yeah,
There's an Article 1, signs in historic districts. So it's $10 for the first offense, $50 for the second offense, and $300 for third and subsequent offenses. Through a work group that I am on now, we are tracking tickets issued by various town departments through a system we've worked out with the police department and the town clerk. Lots of people are surprised to find that these misdemeanor, non-criminal disposition tickets, not misdemeanor, are made payable to the town clerk. So we have to coordinate with her, whether or not they have been paid, whether we should be following up with additional fines. So we have a system in place. I've provided John with a spreadsheet so we can track them internally. It's one that we use for lighting violations, and it's pretty simple.
so if there are violations and there is a ticket written, and that particular, business or entity has other licensing going on in the town, if it's a liquor store or a restaurant, and they have a signed ticket, will they not get their license until the ticket is addressed, or is that a different issue?
If I may, for you, Mr. Chairman, we have chapter 19 of the town code, which talks about delinquent fees and fines. And under our current bylaws, you have to be delinquent for at least 12 months before the town can withhold any permits. There may be something in the municipal modernization bill that can change that. No.
yeah.
So there may be some recent legislation that changed that, but at least historically. Okay, so it has to be delinquent for 12 months. And that's statutory, and that's a statute that we adopted with the
So I guess all the more reason we need to kind of do our own, get it cleaned up.
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
I was wondering if I could ask a question. I'm just curious about the number of violations that you feel, that the sign committee feels that were unable to be addressed just last summer. You said that there were a fair number that you didn't feel that you were able to address because of the way the system is in place now. And I was wondering if you could just quantify how many cases you weren't able to address?
Our spreadsheet has had easily in excess of 30 businesses, and those are ones that we felt compelled to address. That we haven't, we're not out trying to find every small, it's really the banner that's on the side of a building on Main Street. It's the things that are somewhat egregious as to how they are not in compliance with the guidelines, and particularly a location is the more visible are the ones that get more attention. But there's easily 30. I think our spreadsheet has as many as 45, 50.
Yeah.
Some are of less significance, and we tried to break it out where we said, okay, let's, just because staffing was at a point where we couldn't overload them and say go research 50 addresses, we said here's the top 5. Let's try to get these 5 sent out this week. The problem we found is that it was just really disjointed. It was what would get sent out, we weren't able to follow up in 14 days, so then it just sort of fell apart. And a month later, we were saying, all right, let's try to send out another group. It was really, the system is really broken, so that's why we're here.
And could you describe a little bit more about describe the kinds of violations that you feel you're unable to address and the adverse effect that you feel that they're having to the historic district?
Well, let me answer that in reverse order. The reason I'm so dedicated to the sign committee is I think that our streetscapes are essential to Nantucket's character. Buildings are one thing, but the signage is equally important. The visual pollution that can create is overwhelming to me. So its importance is, to me, the streetscape has to be protected. The types of signs are sort of they're numerous. There's signs that are blocking sidewalks. There's freestanding signs, A-frames, things of those natures. Things that signs that are advertising national corporate entities that shouldn't be. I won't be specific here, but beer label signs that stores are using to attract attention. There are banners on the sides of buildings that remain up for months on end. Those are things that the guidelines specifically outlaw. Then there's just signs that haven't been applied for that you might not know are a violation, but you walk down the street and the sign has been put up on a guest house that's literally twice the allowable size. Looks like a great looking sign, but it's twice the allowable
4
size.
square feet instead of 2 square feet. I think one of the things that I see, most common are like the number of signs per business, where they're allowed 2. There's one, business in town that's got 7. So it's things like that, and that's what builds more clutter in the streetscape. And it's also materials. We've been pretty good on that because we've been focusing on making sure that we have the right materials, but there's always somebody sneaking something in that isn't right, and that's what gets noticed. We have some issues with the strip lighting and the accent sort of lighting, which kind of crosses between what both of our groups do. So that's another thing that has popped up from time to time. But we've sort of taken a step back in that our list had gotten so lengthy, and we weren't sure which was up, which was still current, and without having to go back and rephotograph them all again, we're kind of starting from square one with getting this process orchestrated first in the guidelines, and then with John to go through a handful, hopefully every other week, and stay on top of it again. But I think we'll probably go after the ongoing violators first, and people do talk to each other. When we went down Old South Road a couple of years ago, and that's when the banners and the flags were out, that helped, and it cleaned it up. But now they're popping up in other parts of the island, so it's kind of an ongoing thing, and with staff having been short, it's been hard. So we're hoping to turn that around.
Okay.
Anyway, so I guess we're looking, we weren't quite sure what we needed, but in talking with Leslie earlier today, this evening, that, we can get some things prepped up for you, work on this language, get it on your agenda, get it advertised so that we can hit the street running this spring and hopefully get ahead of it. Because once August hits, nobody cares anymore, and it's gone.
So it sounds like, Kevin, that we've had this conversation. Now you folks are going to go back and you're going to essentially work on a procedure that streamlines the whole thing so that the summer doesn't just go by. We will notice that at one of our meetings when it's all together, and then that document in its sort of draft state is published, or the result of our conversation is published.
So we're required to publish the nature of what it is that you're proposing. You don't have to publish the entire regulation.
Okay. Mhm.
And I don't think the bylaw requires that you actually publish the regulation. I mean, we can double check that.
Okay, but so,
You can develop it at the meeting. You don't have to adopt exactly what's advertised. You can make changes and tweaks to
If
it.
we were to look at any other issues in our, guidebook that could use a little tweaking, would this be the time to do that as well?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, because there are a couple of things that, by how they're worded, has sometimes caused confusion, and we'd like to, I guess, bring those to you too. So I think where we're at is we'd like your permission to go ahead and update our guidelines with an update on some processes and definitely on the procedure, for violations, and then bring that back and get that acted upon before spring is upon.
Sounds good.
great. Any other comments? I don't think we take a motion on this, we just, I mean, I think we're all very much in
Great.
favor of your proposal.
Thank
and
you for
appreciate
putting
your
this on us.
recognition.
Thank you.
You guys.
Thank you.
Moves forward, thanks.
Okay, great. Now, for the next several, I'm going to ask Town Council George Pucci to come up and join us. So, I think you all know this, but what we've tried to do here is sort of front-load this agenda so that things that seem to require legal advice have been put in the front so that we have George here to help us out with these. And the first of them is demolition by neglect. Who starts this discussion?
I think we do.
We can.
Yeah.
I can ask a question if it's
Please.
good. When it is determined by the commission, or one person has that feeling and brings it to the commission, and they go out and look, who is it that certifies that the building is actually demolition by neglect to the point that it can't be fixed, or what is our criteria for the amount of demolition? Occasionally, it has happened in the past that something has been classified as demolition by neglect, but there wasn't any engineers or report of it. It was just felt by it was felt by a member of the commission, and it was classified then as demolition by neglect.
Okay. Very good question. Now, I think this, the answer to this question, George, I think, would you basically give us an overview of the whole demo by neglect policy? The fact that it's not actually an HTC thing, it's actually in the town regulations. And then we can sort of head in the direction of Diane's question.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. George Pucci from Town Council's office. Nice to be with you tonight. So the demo by neglect language that is commonly referred to, you do have a town code provision in the Nantucket Town Code. So when you're talking about demo by neglect, you're not actually talking about under your special legislation. but under the town code. And it's in section 124 of the town code, section 124-13, and the title of it is Minimum Maintenance of Buildings and Structures. The HDC is the regulatory body from the town of Nantucket responsible for enforcement of section 124-13. It speaks to a couple of things. One, I don't know how you've been applying this over the years, but it talks about buildings that are subject to this demo by neglect code provision are owners of certain contributing buildings and structures in the Nantucket Historic District shall provide sufficient minimum maintenance as defined in the section to the minimum extent necessary to keep such buildings from falling into a state of poor repair as may be identified hereinafter by the Nantucket Historic District Commission, rules and regulations as contributing buildings and structures to the historic authenticity of the Nantucket Historic District. That language is really confusingly drafted, and my guess would be you've been enforcing it over the years under your own guidelines for what constitutes a contributing structure. That's, just an educated guess. If that's not true, maybe you've been following some other type of customary practice.
Excuse me for interrupting, George, but am I correct in saying that we have not been enforcing this?
We have been, a year or so ago, we wrote some letters to
We
3
did.
or 4 houses.
Yes.
That it
That's-
was
that
felt,
is correct.
but not by any engineering plan. It was felt that the houses were neglected. It was one in Sconset, one on the beginning of Milestone Road, one at the beginning of Gull, and one on Orange Street, and one on
Oh, Cherry.
Cherry Street.
Have they been contributing contributing buildings and
Yes,
stuff?
those are all
They
contributing
were-
buildings.
Now, those are all listed as contributing under the, they would be under basically all of the state, local, federal lists.
Yeah.
I guess that's my question, Mr. Chairman. Well, it's mainly 2 questions about determining what is and what isn't contributing. The language that you read, Mr. Pucci, said certain contributing.
Right.
And my question is, does that include all contributing or just a select number of the contributing?
Yeah, I just
How to
don't
make-
know.
And then contributing to what exactly? So is
Right.
it the local historic district, the state historic district, or the federal historic district?
That part, may lead you to the answer, because that second part, the language, looks like it's applying to the standards that would apply, but it really isn't. It talks about, it says rules and regulations as contributing buildings and structures to the historic authenticity of the Nantucket Historic District. So that to me implies that standard for contributing buildings and structures has to do with whether at some point in time you had a survey done or you made the determination that certain buildings and structures specifically contributed to the historic authenticity of the Nantucket Historic District, which would appear to be a standard that would be different than the state and federal. Unless it's the same, I just don't know.
In my understanding, all 3 historic districts overlap in they overlap. They all cover the entirety of the island, and that they up through. So in 2012, the National Historic Landmark listing for the Nantucket Historic District was updated, which triggered an update at the state level. Prior to that, all 3 historic districts, as I understand it, were the same and had the same contributing buildings, but the the state and federal listings generally allowed the local jurisdiction to take the lead in identifying what resources were considered contributing or not up until that point. And then in 2012, the state and federal listings updated the historic district designation report prior to the local jurisdiction making any changes to what was or was not contributing. Do you understand?
Yeah, I think I follow.
So that has caused some questions about how to apply the state and federal government's assessments on this board locally.
I don't know why this would have been drafted in this manner.
It is confusing language.
Talk about certain contributing structures.
Is it worth noting maybe that this was added in 2004?
Yeah.
So does anybody have any recollection as to what happened in 2004?
What was added in 2000?
This particular piece of
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Did that?
So in 2004, somebody decided that owners of certain contributing buildings and structures in the Nantucket Historic District shall provide sufficient minimum maintenance as defined herein.
That sounds kind
So
of,
it sounds to me like, and then it makes reference to the Enabling Act further down in terms of identifying that.
Say that beginning again.
Owners of certain contributing buildings and structures in the Nantucket Historic District, which is the entire island, shall provide sufficient minimum maintenance as defined herein in subsection B below, to the minimum extent necessary to keep such buildings from falling into a state of poor repair, as may be identified hereinafter by the Nantucket Historic District Commission rules and
That was
regulations.
10, 12 years ago.
In 2004. So the provision shall apply only to the exterior, as one would assume it would. So maybe it was
Interestingly, though,
just,
George says that, sorry to interrupt, but if there's structural issues on the inside of a building
yeah,
that affect the exterior, then
would cover
they're
it, yes.
subject.
it would be subject to that,
Yeah.
absolutely. But you know what I'm thinking? That maybe this was added in 2004 because in the Enabling Act, it doesn't specifically reference this idea of demo by neglect.
It doesn't.
Right. So perhaps this was the attempt at,
Yeah, but it doesn't. Where I think you may be onto something about 2004 is what occurred. Does somebody know what they were referring to when they said owners of certain contributing
Do
structures?
you remember what it was?
I think that back in 2004, there was one structure in particular on Main Street that everyone was very concerned about. I can't remember the address, but it's the White
141.
House.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That is exactly
the Great Revival.
It's 141.
Exactly,
Yeah.
141.
And
across the street.
at the time, you may recall,
That's exactly right.
you had kind of a younger go-getter, assistant HDC administrator that was very interested in, trying to keep that from happening to other buildings. And I believe he is the one that crafted this bylaw. And I do remember people being concerned about like, oh, if I don't paint my house, am I going to be, in trouble with the HDC? If I don't do this, am I going to be in trouble with the HDC? So there may have been language changes or something along the way that didn't, really get cleared up all the way.
And I think here, what happens, I kind of noticed that when Christine was reading it, I think you can, to give meaning to this, it's almost like you have to strike, or you have to just segregate several words after, where it starts out, owners of certain contributing buildings and structures in the Nantucket Historic District. Then I think you need to just stop reading that language and bring that as though it's a bracket and go all the way down to as may be identified hereinafter by the Nantucket Historic District Commission rules and regulations as contributing buildings and structures to the historic authenticity of the Nantucket Historic District. That gives meaning to what was meant by certain contributing structures. So subsequent to this, was there some type of survey or inventory by which you had determined which buildings were contributing buildings and structures to the
prior.
historic.
Prior
Yeah.
to.
The first survey was in 87, I think, 1987.
I think there were several generations of surveys
Yes.
prior to 2004, and there were additional surveys done after that.
After.
Yeah.
So I think the safest way of interpreting this in terms of its coverage would be contributing structures identified on those surveys.
Pre-2004 surveys.
If that's the only one if that's the only ones that there are.
No, there are
No, there
surveys
are
post
additional
that date.
surveys that were done after that date to update the National Historic Landmark listing in 2012.
Then I would say more so than it would be after, because it says, as may be identified here and after by the Nantucket Historic District Commission rules and regulations as contributing buildings and structures to the historic authenticity of the Nantucket Historic District.
So it would include the most recent surveys?
That would be the one that it would include, because it says here and after.
Can't you designate it up to the most recent survey?
You would,
So
because
for
it's.
next year it would be good, and 10 years from it would be good,
Correct.
and
Yeah, because in
50 years.
2004, it says as may be here and after determined.
Right.
And so anything that comes subsequent to that, I think that would be
Will
a
be
good way
considered.
of determining what buildings and structures fall within this coverage of 124.
That's good.
Who,
And so it's totally, it was a question about jurisdiction. I mean, it's totally an HDC thing.
Right.
If it's brought to your attention either on your own observations or inspections by your agent, that you think that something is being left into a state of disrepair that is threatening the integrity of the exterior of the structure, you would want to bring them in for at least a discussion with you about what's going on there.
So they would-
And you would be able to ask about interior and say, well, if you were thinking that there's something going on with the chimney or something that's causing some type of cave-in or something, it depends on what the issue is.
So do we have some type of a form letter that we send to someone to say, hi, you need to come and speak to the HDC regarding your possible demo by neglect?
we must,
Yeah, you
because we did
contacted the
that,
owners with
we
the-
did that with those 4 or 5.
But was that a quote-unquote form letter, or was that just something that was sort
I
of?
think it was a letter written by the HDC to the owner.
It was.
Saying,
Yes.
you're,
Bless you, Joe.
So, but it's okay that there's not a quote-unquote form, it can be just a
Yes.
letter?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, because
I mean-
the problem is that, I remember a couple of times we did that and we couldn't get in touch with the owners. And so it kept snowballing and the house kept deteriorating. And I think the problem is that now we are okaying demolition of these, 19th century homes, and it makes us all kind of really nervous because we're here to save those homes, and
Yeah.
it's not moving along fast enough.
Right, because it says that if it has reached already a state of disrepair, that immediate removal is requested, then the standard of raising applied in your legislation would then apply, that you have to find that it's in the public interest to allow the removal of it.
Well, that's why I was questioning, who says that it's,
HDC.
but who on the HGC is qualified, or do we get a engineer who is paid by the HDC, not by the applicant or owner of the house, to say that the house is beyond repair? We've had people come in and say the houses are
It's fine.
beyond repair, and they're not.
Yeah,
So we have to have something that qualifies as our standard to say that it's beyond repair.
It'd be nice
Yeah.
to have
Because
our
if
official
sill is
person.
rotten, doesn't mean the house has to be demoed.
that's one thing that came up in the recent, the Municipal Modernization Act. One of the provisions that was very helpful, that it's kind of buried in there, but there's a new statutory provision providing for, how you'll see in other permitting contexts, a consultant fee and a 44, section 53G fund, and a deposit. The Municipal Modernization Act allowed any board regulatory authority to enact one of those accounts and have that requirement. So it enables you to enact a regulation by which you can require of somebody who comes before you in particular instances that you need either a peer review of what they're doing, or your own engineering assessment of what's going on. But you need to enact say that again?
We have that ability now.
You have the ability now with the recent change in the Municipal Modernization Act, but you'd have to enact a regulation. Because even conservation commissions often, they think because they hear about, Section 53G that they just automatically have the ability to do it. They don't. They have to enact a regulation providing for it. But now, you would have that same ability that a conservation commission would have to enact that type of regulation, requiring it for you. And you don't want to do it in your run-of-the-mill application, but certainly if you've got a significant contributing structure that you've got a real concern that they're going to have to reconstruct the whole thing and basically, Disneyfy it, and you need your own engineer to really assess it. That would be a good instance where you want to be able to assess that consulting fee cost over to that property owner.
So, but we
That's
have
where
to
it
enact
goes.
this
You would have
legislation
to enact
first.
the regulation. You don't have to go to town meeting, it would just be regulation that you'd be able to enact.
You don't have to go
Okay.
to town meeting.
And that, I'm happy to send you some guidance on that if
I
you'd
think that
like.
would be
under-
really
Yeah,
helpful.
we should have.
Yeah, very helpful. Wow. That was educational.
That was very educational.
Yeah. Does the board have any other questions on that issue?
I always thought there was a fine associated with that.
Demo by neglect.
Yeah.
There is.
And there's it's gonna be compounded daily, but if
Yep.
you put that money back into rehabbing the structure, the fine's forgiven.
They must have done that as an offer in one
Right,
particular case.
I'm just thinking of something that I had worked on once, and it got really significant, and
Yeah.
that's what they said.
And that's, so where you end up on these is really, that's in the code provision in question. It talks about the penalty, $300 per day, and each day a violation exists. It can lead to a burdensome fine. The problem is it doesn't, fines don't preserve the structure, unfortunately.
No,
You
but
know,
9 times out of 10, it gets
You
somebody to do
can
something.
call their attention to it. But yeah, certainly there's your finding authority provided right in that section. Just other highlights on it would be you have an ability to grant a waiver in case of hardship, financial hardship, or
Which
other
I think Gull Island was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
exigent circumstances.
Exactly.
So it gives you flexibility for that as well. Your hard cases, you'd want to get authorization from the Board of Selectmen sooner rather than later to seek injunctive relief. If you're talking about something that is in imminent danger, like it's facing a winter and it can't face one more winter, you want to get authority right away to go in and seek injunctive relief in that situation, get it buttoned up at least.
George, who writes that regulation that the HDC would use to get into this? Do we, the HDC, write the regulation and have it as just part of our bunch of things, or does it have to be written by you and be included?
This is for peer review or consultant fee?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would recommend we draft it for you and then you vote it. I put that on my list. I'll send you I'll send Leslie just a summary of what the law provides and maybe a model if you want to adopt it.
Very good. Okay,
Great.
everyone good?
Yeah.
Okay, next thing up is certificate of non-applicability. George, are you aware of the background on this particular item?
No.
Okay. There actually, would you like to present, or?
Well, no, go right ahead.
Okay, and please, you gotta correct me if I'm wrong.
'Cause I was there.
Here's
I
my
was there,
understanding.
too.
Whole bloody
Okay.
battle with Val.
So apparently, somewhere buried in the original language, building with Nantucket in mind, there is, this board is empowered to issue what is called a certificate of non-applicability, which basically means that whatever this person is contemplating doing does not need to go before the board because it's not at all viewable from a public way, basically. Okay? So nobody, maybe you've had experience with this, but I don't know anyone who's ever looked for one, obtained one. The board doesn't have any form work, nothing. It's just a non-event. Things come before the board. If it's indeed not visible, we say as much and move on. But we had one person who found that language, took the board to task because they insisted correctly that their project was not visible from a public way.
No,
and it
that's
went.
incorrect.
Oh, it is
Now
visible?
you're getting into language that no, that's not correct. It was visible from a public way, from the land bank. And what they took issue with was that we in fact opened the application and we deigned to have a look at it. What he wanted was a certificate of non-applicability from the administrator of the HDC that just said, here's your shed. It's fine. But instead, the shed came to the board and we opened the application like we open every application. It didn't get put on the consent list. Oh, no, it did get put on the consent list. And he was mad, and because we approved his shed, because he didn't want his shed
Approved, right,
that
he
way.
wanted it non-applicable.
Yeah,
Because-
he didn't want you to act on it at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think we need to remove that, because quite frankly, I don't believe there really
Do you know
is
where that
too
is
many
in the
places
enabling
that you
legislation?
can't
It's
see
in the
things.
You have it?
And in fact,
It's,
if
I have
we
it.
had
Five,
gone with
section
that
five.
in
I
his
know what it
case,
is.
that opened up, that whole Hawthorne Park just opened up, and it would have been visible then. So how do you make a non-applicability
It was.
judgment when things are changing
Context
constantly?
changes, and so
All
I
the
I
time.
feel like it's dangerous for this board to issue a document that basically says something is like in perpetuity not visible.
Yeah, the only way a problem could arise that I could see, other than, imagination, would be if if the building inspector had a question about it, well, why don't you have this, you don't have a certificate, you don't have a sign off from HDC. And they say, well, we didn't go to HDC because it doesn't go under their legislation.
Right.
But
And
they're
then you
the,
could get a snag that way. That's what I think a certificate of non-applicability was originally designed for, is so that the building inspector knows they've been to HDC. They either got denied, in which case they can't get the building permit. They got approved, in which case I got the sign off, I can issue it. Or it's non-applicable, therefore I can sign off on it. I can check the box next to HDC, and then I can look for other approvals that I need to look for.
I think we need to strike
what
it.
is the difference between putting it on consent or,
No, because it makes it subject to the building inspector.
right, but it's still,
Well, no, putting it on consent is, what the property owner there, the way you described it, was improper for what they were seeking from the agent, because the agent doesn't have the authority to issue a certificate of non-applicability.
The agent?
He was his own agent.
He was his own agent.
No, he was suggesting that the staff would issue that.
That's what I'm saying. So staff, I'm saying, a certificate of non-applicability has to be issued by the commission. So you could do it through consent to come back to you.
This is the whole point, George. This has to go away.
Yeah.
it has,
You'd have to amend your legislation.
Okay,
Well-
so, it seems like, but it's housekeeping stuff. I think it just needs to go away. We don't even have a form. You know, nobody,
Yeah, we.
John, you've been dying to say
I
something.
comment on it, in the short time I've been on this board, we've never saw an application like that, we've never seen a form or anything, never issued one.
There you go.
Never been one, so.
Well,
Right.
he was a
Thank you.
50
troublemaking
years.
lawyer as,
Okay, well, he had a statement, and he wanted to prove a point, but as it turned out, and as now that Hawthorne Park has become what it has become, his shed may very well be visible from the land bank.
and I was the one who called to have it viewed because of the meeting of Duke's Road and Hawthorne Lane that come down and actually do meet, but they have not been opened up for the last 10 feet of each road. And there's nothing to say that it isn't going to be done, and it more than likely is going to be done. And to approve something that he wanted, the way he wanted to do it, was wrong. It was,
Okay.
the commissioners are the ones that are supposed to say that a building is
Yeah,
good or
absolutely.
not.
Absolutely, so it should, if it came back to you and you determined that, no, you're not entitled to a certificate of non-applicability, you have to file and you need to get a certificate of appropriateness for it.
And he did.
And he
we gave
did.
it to him, and we okayed his shed, but that, he
But
was out to make a point.
He went
Yeah,
to the.
but he was wrong though, and
Yeah.
he, that one, he appealed to the Board of Selectmen, I think.
Yeah,
He did.
and
He
we,
certainly did.
Christine and I went, and
And-
we won.
Yes,
Well, the Board of
correct, so,
Selectmen backed us up, so.
yeah.
But
I
we
remember
just
giving
don't
you an
wanna have
opinion
to
on
do
it.
that
It-
again.
What?
We just don't want to have to do that again, so we'd rather just lose the language.
Yeah,
We want to strike the language of the certificate for non-applicability because it is not relevant in this.
Anymore.
Well, apparently it hasn't been relevant for
For a
quite
long
some
time,
time.
but we could say
Yeah.
anymore.
it could provide a,
We don't,
I'm-
practically, we don't use it.
Yeah.
So that's what we're saying.
The-
So if practically we don't use it and it's not within our realm, then why should it be there? And is there a way for us to lose the language?
The consent agenda takes care of these sort of things.
Yeah.
correct, and the thing is about it, it does, you will find a provision for a certificate of non-applicability and commonly in historic district legislation, so I would be very careful just because of one instance of a difficult
Okay.
person, and then you remove something that has a lot of reason for being in these.
It is
Even-
used in Boston.
Thank
I
you
do
for
know
saying
that.
that. I mean, although it's a tool that perhaps this board may not use heretofore, there may come a time in the future when we may wish to exercise that option.
Okay.
I can't imagine for what reason.
And, you know,
That's where I'm having a hard time. It's like giving me a brain tumor.
Don't say that.
It is.
All right, so we'll let it be. But,
Well,
and consider
I think we
that,
should research it and look more on our part or why it's in other HDC commissions in other parts of the state.
What is it good for?
What is it good for? Why have something that they
In
can
Boston-
latch on to?
In Boston,
in
it's
Boston,
used.
it's like if you have a
backside of your
row
house.
of townhouses that are obviously going to stay there forever, and you want to do something on the back of those, you're not going to see it, except from a helicopter. Here, we've got a landscape that's constantly changing.
Right.
Right, so that's why.
Ownership that's constantly changing.
Right.
So it's a very different sort of kettle of
Yeah.
fish here.
So I think that
That
the
being
least
said-
amount of choices that we put up to people is, it's better, it's ridiculous to go to the HDC, I mean, to the BOS for something,
Well, it
Yes.
happened once in 50 years.
and
If we wanted to change it, would we have to bring it up at town meeting? or
It would,
that be-
yeah, it would have to be in a warrant article, so you'd,
And the public is going to view that as something where we're
Yes.
getting high
Yes,
and mighty, so.
Right.
um,
And nothing could be
absolutely
further.
right.
Nothing could be further.
Anyway,
All right.
thank you.
Thank you.
We're all set on that one?
Yep.
Now, item 3, and we have 2 members of Nantucket Advisory in the room with us right now. You are familiar with our Historic District Commission designation of the old historic district of the town of Nantucket and of the town of Sconset, right?
Correct.
to certain borders, and every now and again, those borders change. There is a zoning map now in Nantucket defining what we would call sort of the old historic district of Nantucket. Height limitation mainly. We are, for the Nantucket, you guys feel free to come up if you'd like.
No, continue.
Okay, you know, listen, no, I want to make sure I get it right.
Nantucket Advisory Board, I think you all have some various plans before you.
Well, now, sorry, Brad, one thing, this is only a procedural.
Yes.
Okay, so right now, we're not discussing the actual
I
HDC.
want to see if it's, how it's legal.
We want to know how to get there, exactly, what the procedure is. So, we are going to establish a historic district commission map of the town of Nantucket. What do we need to do to make sure that that's a legal thing?
How did you do it before? How did you
I
do
have
it?
no idea. I mean, that was way
I
before
mean,
my
what
time.
constitutes the OHD
Yeah.
in town, in Sconset,
Sconset.
and in Nantucket?
Who creates the borders?
The old historic district, that started in what, 1972? That's how the HDC started.
Right, and the
And
lines
then,
have changed
After
some.
Tristram's was built, we decided it was going to encompass the whole island, and then somehow we got the old historic district in town, and then we got the Sconset district.
Correct,
And we have something in Nantucket which is very vague,
right.
very vague.
Yeah, and I could be wrong, but as I understand it, when the HDC was established,
Right.
there were two historic districts, the one in town and the one in Sconset.
Yep.
And those boundaries were set at an early date. And then later, in the 70s, when that development was established, and the town decided to expand the historic district to include the whole island, it just filled in the rest of the area, and the existing historic districts in town and in Sconset were were redefined as the old historic districts. That's the way I understand it. And I'm not quite, the establishment of the old historic district in Nantucket that's used by the Nantucket Advisory Group, I'm not quite certain about how that was started. Was that part of, was
Well,
that one of the original historic
that's
districts? Or
Funny
did
you
that come later?
bring that up, is because, so we have a district in town, in Sconset. I've been on the board for 6 or 7 years now, and it's sort of been something very vague in Nantucket. So, what I did look at is the Village Residential District, which is part of the zoning town map.
That's zoning.
But, okay, it's separate, but it is part of Nantucket, and that's old Nantucket. And we would like, this is more like house cleaning. We're just like trying to make sure that everything is consistent on whether it's the zoning, HDC, everything, just trying to, everybody be on the same page. So
So-
how we get about doing that, I have no idea.
So are you, excuse me for asking you this, but are you in fact asking for an update of what the core historic district is within Nantucket?
So,
Because that's how it's defined for town and Sconset.
this, I'm sure you all know, this is the zoning Nantucket area. That's current zoning with various. So, around this way. So these are some areas that I would like to
Right.
include that I'm sure that you've all looked at.
But
And then,
you're using the zoning map as your basis.
well, I'm just trying to
Yeah, no,
be
I'm just,
consistent everywhere.
uh-huh.
So here is current zoning, here's your village residential, here's your LUG 1, LUG 3. We're just trying to make sure that if you're on the Nantucket Advisory Board and you're looking at something that it has some teeth to it.
Yeah, like, that's the height, if it's in
Yeah.
that, then you can.
I mean, there's an article that's been approved by the planning board that will be coming for the NCOM meeting to limit all the Nantucket area plan, everything to 25 feet. But that's not under discussion tonight. I just don't know how to get the HDC to approve what the Nantucket Advisory Board should do and what's under our purview.
Okay, so that's the basis of having this on the list. Now, from what you've just heard, do we need to, make notifications of any kind or have some certain kind of review, or do we simply adopt, sit at the table with Nantucket Advisory and adopt our own
Yeah, I think you
historic district?
Our own core
Yeah.
historic
could. It
district for
could,
Nantucket?
just because you have the other two, but it has limited value, or
It does have.
I don't want to say it has limited value, because that implies that I'm being dismissive of the reasoning for it, for local concerns. I don't know about that, but it has limited value in terms of legality about what it does for you. In other words,
Well, I think it gives it, if there was something concrete, then you could say, okay, it's in this district, so therefore you have to have this kind of massing or this kind of height,
Yeah.
and what would give you,
it would show like a basis for your
Yes.
decision, that it's not arbitrary or capricious.
Exactly.
That's at most of what it would do, because your legislation, your entire island is your historic district. so.
Exactly. So I guess my question is, I don't understand what benefit it would give to have an expanded old Nantucket Historic District, since all of Nantucket is already in the historic district and under the review of this board, and whatever height limits or massing limits, however the citizens wish to restrict the building envelope, zoning is a more appropriate tool, I think, for that.
But see, none of that has been defined. There is no area that technically is under the Nantucket Advisory Board's purview.
Ha, okay,
and
that
then-
makes a lot more sense.
So you're saying that
So,
you
I
don't
mean,
have a
there are all these
core?
No,
maps
I
here,
totally
and
get
none
it.
of them are
You wanna know
under the
something?
HCC
Brad.
committee's purview.
You don't
Okay,
have
this is
core
not a
historic?
legal issue. This is basically us just sitting down and agreeing to what you're reviewing and what you're
I
not.
always thought it was this.
A former chairwoman asked me to do this 18 months ago, and that's
Okay.
all I've been
All
trying
right.
to do.
Nope, got it.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll just agree, yes.
No, I've lost my train of thought, Mr. Chairman. I think if you are going to have a Nantucket Advisory Review Board, where
Yeah.
they're going to perhaps apply some kinds of different standards to Nantucket, there does need to be a map developed,
Yes.
because we don't have one on record. I think
And
it's
that-
unclear.
There it is.
I have
Okay.
presented to you
And-
eight months ago.
And this was really, I think, more important relative to the height, because there was a zoning area that limited height to 25 feet, and then there was a different area maybe that the HGC advisory boards
LUG
thought
1, LUG 3.
it
That's right.
included.
But the height restriction was not in place on
But the
those.
height restriction wasn't in place on the outlying area. So
Mm-hmm.
now I think the citizen petition for town meeting, which is zoning, is working to align sort of everyone's thought of what Nantucket is and where the height restriction
Right.
applies.
This is more like housekeeping than anything else, but
So you don't want to expand the height thing? I thought you did.
That's a zoning thing.
I know it is, but that's what, they said they want to
this is
align
what-
these.
They wanted
is
to go
current
into-
zoning.
Correct.
And personal citizens article, which I got positive recommendation from, this whole area now will hopefully be with a 25-foot height restriction
Can I ask
going
why?
forward.
Sorry, can
I'm
I
sorry?
just ask why?
It's also because of the Nantucket Area Plan, and what we're trying to do is preserve the community feeling and just preserve the architecture that we have here.
I'm okay. I'm just curious because, I know Long Pond got sucked into that, and I got involved in a situation
Oh, I know,
there
you did
where
many houses there.
a lot of the houses are already over 25, but the new houses have to be 25, and I don't know.
Hey,
I'm just
Val,
struggling with the.
I hear what you're saying. it's not necessarily germane to what we're discussing right now.
Okay,
Like, so
okay.
apparently there's a citizen-sponsored warrant
Okay.
article that's up that relates to zoning and height and all that. That's one thing.
Okay.
The other thing is for this board to get together with Brad and
Okay.
company and just establish, what we consider to be the boundaries of what their board reviews when we send them something.
Right.
So
Plus, the
that,
other
Right.
thing is,
But they want those to align, is what I'm hearing too. So I'm kind of.
well, nobody's gonna know the answer to that until after town meeting.
Right, and just, in delineating what the boundaries are of the Nantucket Advisory Group's, jurisdiction, we'll just have to look carefully at, the character of these various different sub-areas within Nantucket, and look at the surveys that we have in place and what's defined as being contributing and non-contributing, and compare that to what it is that you're proposing.
okay, so, actually, as Val pointed out, the HDC made decisions prior that allowed houses in Long Pond to be higher than 25 feet. That was a decision back then. What we need to do is just be consistent. This is what it is. I mean, we have, building with Nantucket in mind. In the Nantucket area, future houses need to be 25 feet or less. This needs to be in writing, not something that, well, I mean, Mr. McLaughlin has been here a long time. He shot my house down 30 some odd years ago because it was at 28 feet. They need to bring it to 25 feet. Okay? So we just need some consistency.
Okay, but that's a zoning thing.
Right,
But it's HDC as well. If the HDC can say, I'm sorry, I'm looking at this application, it's 25 feet. You don't even look at zoning. That is,
Why is it just zoning? I think
well, that's, we
he's
need.
right.
the MAB
Brad,
needs-
this is really a discussion for the board,
Okay,
but,
that's fine.
because there's a lot to say on this score, a lot to say. So, sorry, John.
I'll make a synopsis of it. Currently, in my opinion, apparently you can go to 30 feet anywhere in the island. That's the law now. Okay, as far as I know.
40 in some
If
places,
you change something, go to 40, yeah.
25 in
Commercial,
downtown,
yeah.
old,
The point is that when they first started Tristan, that's when the commission decided to stop something. Well, they should have continued at other places, but time evolved and it didn't. But the only thing about Nantucket, having a Nantucket historic area, this is the closest you should get. Because once you get over to Old Point Road, from there all the way down Dionis Road, you're going into trophy houses.
Yeah.
That's where the hurt's coming. You can get a full 2.5-story house under 30 feet, there's no problem. You can do it with a story and a half with dormers to get under there. It can be done architecturally. So if the town votes to make it 25 feet out there, then they have to file it with Boston, and that's fine. It's the vote of the town. And if they want to do it, I'll do whatever they vote.
okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, as far as I understand it then, in terms of delineating a boundary in Nantucket that the advisory board would help the HDC to review, that's just up for us to work out on our own, and it doesn't require anything additional. Is that correct? I mean, we would have to post it.
We have to post it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we vote on it.
Correct.
Right.
Well, and hash it out with these guys.
Yeah,
And
but
that's-
in other words, yeah, it doesn't need to
Yeah.
go to town meeting
So-
or,
Right.
All right, I understand what you're saying, but what about an old historic Nantucket district within Nantucket?
That
See, they're looking
opens
for a
up
core
things like
historic
true
district now,
divided
the way
light.
they have it in Wisconsin and town.
Exactly,
But-
yes, exactly.
Yeah, I
They
get
want
that.
a core historic district,
They have
which is
one,
what I
think
thought this was.
Yeah, the
I
little
was
one-
always under the impression
Where's
it
the
was
one that
this.
it starts at the thing that
Like
says
C
Town
Street?
of Nantucket, right by the old fire station.
No, it actually starts by Second Bridge.
I think the
Does it?
character and qualities of this, of whatever this historic district is, I think we all need to have an additional conversation, or many conversations about that.
Right.
But this conversation with town council and with Leslie from Plus was really about the mechanics of what we needed
Correct.
to do to
And
get
it's
that
much
started.
simpler than I imagined that it
So
would be.
that's
So,
great news.
so we will put it on for other business, and now that I know what
Yeah.
we're doing. Okay,
Yeah.
it sounds like there's a lot to talk about. Thank you,
Can I just-
Brad.
I'm
Yes.
sorry, I'm
Don't
sorry.
do it next week while we're three away.
With issues like
Thanks,
that,
Brad.
the obligation to post in the paper, how does that work? In terms of, like, what determines whether something has to be noticed in the paper?
Yeah, well, a regulation change has to be noticed under your town bylaw. But you have to have a hearing on it. This issue of the Nantucket map, I would have to look into it more about what it is exactly he's looking for. It sounds to me that it's just a sort of, yeah, like a published policy decision that you would make. So all you would need to do is just have it as part of a duly noticed public meeting, where you say, you know, you have an agenda item that reasonably describes what it is that you're going to discuss it in public, and then you can have a vote on it.
Yes, okay, thank you. Now, item 5, I had moved away from town council, but then there was somebody, and I honestly, I can't remember who told me this, that the reason that this is on, but, you know, sort of jump-starting the revisions to building with Nantucket in mind, was that that we couldn't, we
Me.
didn't know where to, did
Me.
you tell me that?
Yeah, I was talking about it
Okay.
because I have been
Oh, that's
talking
right.
to Michael May about this, and honestly, we don't know if we need to legally notice a work group, or if it's something that can be done. Clearly, we don't want to violate any open meeting laws or anything
If there's
else.
two members of this board,
Yes.
that are a subcommittee, we have to notice it.
Of course, but if there weren't, two, could we just informally get together and sit down and rip our book apart and informally and just,
Well, I mean, just as a matter of,
just as volunteers, so to speak?
yeah, but if it's an official, if you're like a designee of a board doing it for an official capacity, it should really be noticed. If it's a single designee, then yeah, you could sit as a working group and come back and don't have to notice your meetings or.
Okay,
All right,
So
let's
then-
take that one step further. What if there's one member of the Historic District Commission, one member of the Planning Board, one member of the Board of Selectmen?
Then it's really more of a formal committee.
Okay, just, I mean, I don't know who this
Subject to
board
the
is,
open
but, you
meeting
know,
law.
just so we know.
okay, so,
Okay.
You know, one issue that came up was funding, right?
Oh, yeah.
it's CPC funding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, the question, would you rather proceed under that type of thing, that you get you get professional services involved and hire somebody to review it?
Right,
Bring it
right.
back.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Yes.
we do have $30,000 from the CPC to use for a new guidebook, if you will. And you know, we've had that funding for several years now, and we've been getting questions from the CPC. You know, when are you going to use that money? Will you want to use it for something else if you're not going to? So there's really no expiration per se on the money that's allocated through CPC, but there is a point in time when
Could slip
they
away.
may say enough is enough. And I think $30,000, you know, was a generous allocation from them, and it would be unfortunate to not
Let
use
it
that
go.
money.
How do you form a committee, though? Do you have to, like, put it in the paper and say, we're thinking about
That was the
updating this
question.
book?
No, you could just, again, everything you do has to be part of a publicly noticed agenda item. And you could say, we designate Christine to work on this for us for 2 months. You could do that. But if you're
Well-
traveling
Oh, really?
over to the imprimatur of, you know, you have a designee of planning board, you have a designee of plus, and you have a designee of HDC, then you're really talking about.
That was
a subcommittee.
hypothetical.
Yeah, that was very hypothetical.
Yeah,
Oh,
but so,
fine.
but we are talking about more than one person.
That is the subcommittee.
Right.
Yeah, it wouldn't just be one person, it would be several volunteers.
Yeah.
But again, not necessarily more than one
More than one
HDC
HDC.
person.
I think, to be on the safe side, if
Just
a
notice
group
it.
of people is going to be working together on an official document or on behalf of the HDC, noticing it as a public meeting, posting it with the town clerk
Yeah.
is the way to go, and you don't want to fall into open meeting law.
Okay,
Yeah, so
so
all
that
we-
was the
all we would-
question, so you have
Okay.
to notice it, that was the question that was posed.
Okay.
So could we post that on one of these meetings that we're going to talk about it, say, one of these
Yeah.
weeks when everybody's back?
No, but I'm saying, the work group itself has to be,
Yeah, you'll have to notice.
You have to post the meeting, you have
Post
to
a
take
meeting.
minutes, and you don't have to advertise in the paper, but you have to
Oh,
post it with the
God.
town clerk 48 hours in advance. Minutes need to be
yeah,
taken.
that's the
It
problem.
has to be
That's the nice thing
documented.
about having somebody
They'll
just
do it.
do 90% of the work,
Right.
get a committee together to review where they are, and,
Peter
'cause
Boyce
that-
was going to help. Wait,
Well-
some time ago, but he's gone now.
Or sometimes you even designate a member to look at what the consultant did, and then the member comes back and says,
Reports
I
back.
read this, here's the big ticket items I noticed, here,
Love it.
and
Yeah.
lead a discussion that way too.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chairman, I think it's great that people on the HDC or other people that are interested in the HDC want to work on this, but I think realistically, if you want to get it done, you should use the money for a consultant, and
gonna
then
be a
just have
lot of
other people
time.
who are really active in the process,
Yeah.
because, doing things grassroots, a lot of
I will
times just
speak to
doesn't
that.
happen.
With all those applications that I spent months working on in that work group that just fell apart,
I agree.
so.
Yeah.
It's too difficult. It's
Are we
way
still on
too
number
difficult to put the
We are
program
on-
together
yes.
and not have to
Comment.
Okay.
do everything that's
Yeah.
involved.
It's
John?
like the worst book club ever invented.
Yeah.
It is. No, because of the minutes and the having a note taker
Yeah.
and
It's just
Really.
that we
noticing
we
it.
could be getting
Beer
so
and
much
wine
done,
is
but it's
inappropriate
so
at those
bureaucratic.
meetings.
So Leslie, who decides who the consultant is?
So what we would do, it is $30,000, so we have to follow certain procurement laws. We would issue an RFP, if it's the direction that we're getting tonight, and you all could designate someone to help go through the responses to the RFP, to pick the consultant, or, we could bring forward, the staff's top 3, and the commission could vote on it. I mean, it could be set up really any kind of way.
Okay.
But we do have to follow the procurement process.
Hildebrand.
I'd like, yeah.
Hang on. John, you had a question.
On building with Nantucket in mind, I gave all the members one of these a month ago, maybe.
I still have it.
I don't have enough to go around now because that's what's left. Put one on each side of the table. Pass it around. The reason I done this is not the reading on the front page. It's just 2 pages since I've been here. The only 2 voted guidelines are there. It's only 2 in all these years, since 1972. They've had meetings, organization meetings, year after year. You come to a meeting, you spend 3 hours discussing something, and you never voted another change or something to update with the new type of materials and stuff. It's never been done. Now, I'm just saying, this is your copies, you want to make copies, but as far as I'm concerned, that's what's got to be done. That guidebook has to be rewritten, in many ways. I thought we had a committee that's going to get together and rewrite it.
Well, so what we're talking about now, John, is we have given or earmarked $30,000 to hire a consultant to basically get most of the work done to the rewrite of the guidebook. Is it?
The CPC gave us the
Yeah.
money.
And they may want it back
The
after a while.
CPC gave us the money.
Is it the consensus of this board that we should just have Plus start the?
Under certain conditions, and I want the net to be cast widely. I don't want, I think that we should be recruiting people to do this, not from Nantucket.
Okay.
Like, we should try to go to some graduate schools that have programs in preservation, just kind of broadcast the job out there a little bit more widely than we typically might. see what kind of, I mean, maybe we won't get any feedback, I don't know, but I'd like it to be.
No, I think that's a good idea.
In terms of an action item moving forward, it would be nice to be able to authorize Leslie to draft an RFP that we could then review.
Yeah,
Yes.
perfect. Can we leave that in your hands?
You
and
can,
Let us know when it's available for
Thank
review.
you.
absolutely.
Okay, any other thoughts on item 5?
I think you have to
You're
take a
gonna make a
vote.
motion
I
at
think
the
you have to
RFP
make a
Oh,
motion.
okay, yeah. So can I hear
Yeah.
a motion?
Make a motion.
So move on for Leslie to create an RFP to start the process to hiring a consultant to rewrite Building with Nantucket in mind.
Very good. All those in favor of Diane's motion?
Aye.
Aye. Great, thank you.
Is this where you moved some? No.
We're
I think we're on 6, right?
we're on item 6. 12 and 14 are moving down, but we'll just put those at the end of where we
8.
think we need George. So 6 does require George.
HDC inspections.
Yeah. Okay, so I got some bad news. I don't know whether we consider this bad news or what, but in doing the inspections, when we approve a set of drawings and they're stamped, any deviation from those plans when they do the site inspections has to come back to the board. Leslie told me that they are failing approximately 60% of the sign-offs.
Told you that.
Yeah.
Why?
Because somebody put a vent in, or somebody did this or that thing. So if all of these infractions came back to the board proper, our meetings would last all night long.
Exactly.
So George, was giving good counsel and something that I really hated hearing, which was that basically someone doing the sign-offs or staff is not empowered in any way to make a call, a
They
discretion.
used to be.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time this has ever
Right.
come up with me in 20-something years. So what George is saying is that any infraction, if gutters aren't shown on a building and it's approved that way and gutters are on there, it has to come back before the board. So we could potentially be swamped with violations, most of which are very minor, but they're all a digression or a deviation from what was the drawings that were approved. So that's a problem.
I thought
So-
maybe somebody, like we do the consent agenda, we have some staff people go through perhaps these failed inspections, especially if there's not a railing, could have a procedure that's similar, and the staff could designate that instead of fining someone $500, having to make all the copies, come to the, it just bogs everything down. Why can't we do that? If they have the ability to make a consent item, why not on the other end?
Right. And I believe that you reached sort of the same conclusion where we could have a consent designated member of the board review the consent and approve that, and it would be all set.
Yeah, I mean, it comes to get an occupancy permit. So to get an occupancy permit, you need a written certification from the HDC that the building or structure has been constructed or altered in compliance with the terms of the certificate of appropriateness. So that's where the advice comes from, and whether it's good news or bad news, I have to just give you what the statute says, and
Right.
that's pretty clear that you need a certification from the HDC that has been done in compliance with the terms of the certificate of appropriateness. So yeah, you could do it that it comes back to the HTC in a consent form to approve that that's in compliance with the certificate of appropriateness.
Okay.
Yeah, we could do, couldn't we do it like if the inspectors come back, let's say they had 30 inspections on a particular week, and out of those 30 inspections, 5 of them got failed. Couldn't the 5 fail?
20 of them.
Okay, let's,
Most of
I'm
them.
thinking more positively.
Yeah, no, I wish I could.
Okay, all right, so let's say 10 of them go
Okay.
to John, and John has a list of the 10 properties that failed the inspection, and
And the reason.
and there's a reason.
Yeah.
You can see, he does a synopsis, if you will, for us.
Right.
And, you know,
I'm
put in
struggling
SDL rather than
with
TDL.
the fine component of it. As somebody who didn't put
Exactly.
railing paying $500.
right. So then the question is, if it comes back to us, does that automatically trigger?
No,
Mr.
it
Chairman,
shouldn't.
if I may.
Yes, Leslie.
I just want to clarify a couple of things. First of all, no one's been fined, so that hasn't happened.
To apply for as-built changes, there's a fine. It's 10 times the amount of the infraction, and 50 is the most.
That's
Smallish.
true, but I guess it's how you interpret what's an as-built. I mean, my interpretation of an as-built would be something that's just built without a permit. But if you have an open permit and you deviated from that in some way, then you would be applying for revision.
I think
Because it's
that
still
needs
Yeah.
to be clarified then, because I've
Yeah.
had people pay a lot of money for
It
a
doesn't-
step going this way instead of that way.
And maybe that's something that we should clarify on your fee schedule, just so.
You know, I thought we had clarification on that because, yes, everyone was getting fined like crazy for a while. And then what happened is we said, well, this building doesn't have a C of O. It still has an open
Right.
building permit.
Right.
Therefore, it is still being constructed.
Yeah.
So it's not an as-built until you have a C of O, and it's something that's applied after the C of O.
Right, I agree with you on that.
So that's the way we've been kind of doing
What
it.
we've been reviewing.
So
Yeah.
it sounds like we're on the same page.
If John has a list of type of things that the staff can okay, like
Well, he still
gutters
has to
and
run it
pipes
by
and all
us.
that stuff, if they put in, as I was saying, SDL windows instead of TDL windows, then that would
Well,
have to
that's
come back
huge,
to us.
yeah.
So
Yes.
there would be a stepladder of severeness that he would be able to handle and understand.
Right. Now, that's pretty much what we're describing. The one step, though, is
You have to
once John has identified, oh, well, the drawings that we approved don't show gutters, and this building does have gutters, then John would say, okay, so that's something that can get approved on consent
Right.
by a member of this board. So,
And
yeah.
Mr. Chairman, the other sort of workaround that we came up with was, since you can't delegate to staff, sign off on certain things that aren't shown on the certificate of appropriateness, you could delegate that to, say, the chairman or another member of the board. So when staff does the inspections and things fail for minor things such as, you know, they have gutters, the gutters match, but the gutters were on the plan. Or they have the stoop with the steps, but instead of going down to the left, it goes down to the right. Or things like that, we could put those together. The chairman could come into the office, or whoever could come into the office and sign off on those. Instead of having
so it
to,
doesn't even
like,
go to
reapply
it
and
doesn't
back to
go to
the meeting
consent?
and do all that.
It doesn't go onto the consent
You wouldn't
agenda.
necessarily have to. I mean, if you're wanting to speed up the process and you're wanting to have
All
the
right.
ability to sign off on
Yeah,
some of
it
those
would be
minor
good to have a
things.
formal vote to designate either the chair.
Is that all that's required?
Yeah, because then the HTC is acting on it.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, that's a
Did you
great
have a,
idea.
all right, so hang on.
Even better.
You have a comment, don't you?
Yeah, this does mention staff. Other staff, on, here, why don't you move on to them?
Oh, John, I think, aren't we,
You have
We
it?
have that.
yeah, we have that, but is that,
Yeah, we have this.
Oh, you have, it. Okay.
We
I
have
got-
it. You
got
gave that
it.
to
Now
us.
I want to
That's a great idea, Leslie.
take a discussion on it. right now,
Do it in the office.
So we'll
biggest-
just
Doesn't have to
designate
bog
somebody from the
everything
board
down.
and go look at the weekly list
Yeah.
and say yes, no, maybe so.
We could even
Okay.
do that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Hey, John, I think I know what you're gonna talk about. Right now, what the subject is the fact that the staff, any staff, cannot sign off any differences between what this board has approved and the field condition. A board member has to do it,
okay, fine.
okay?
I'm not gonna discuss that.
Okay.
It says staff, all right. The fact that this is the only town department, we'll call it, that doesn't have any staff, no administrator or anything. The planning board took this over through the Board of Selectmen, okay? The operation. It started a couple of years ago and they just took it over and we went to the selectmen and said we wanted to take out. They added this department when they were listing consolidating departments, and they have no right, in my opinion, and an attorney's opinion, I know, okay, that they have no right to interfere with the HDC, and this has been happening for over a year now, all right? You have a volunteers set up, that's fine, call them volunteers, but do not have an administrator, and I think we should have it at all times, and
So-
we should look into it.
John, I hear you. That's actually item number 14
Where is
on
that?
this list. Now, 14 has been moved up, okay? This is, see, it says discussion of relationship between HCC and Plus.
Okay.
That's that subject, okay?
Is it up here now?
No.
On the table?
No, but it's gonna be soon because we want George to participate in this conversation, okay? So, right now, what we're discussing is sign-offs, and everyone is now aware that, as I am, that the staff can't do that. So, we know that we can bring the stuff in under consent, or if it's a really minor infraction, we know that we can have a designated member of this board.
I like that idea, thank you.
Just go down, review, and sign off.
May I make a suggestion, Chairman
Please do,
Paul?
yes.
That instead of designating a particular person on the board, because from week to week that might change, perhaps we might make the language a little broader and just say a member
Any member.
of the HDC board can go to the Plus office to help out with the,
I think that's fine.
is that okay with
Absolutely.
you?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Of duty.
Yeah, I mean, like rotating, whatever,
Yeah.
like we all do it on a rotational basis or
No,
something.
totally fine.
That keeps
Is it-
everybody involved.
It's fine with me. Is it fine with,
Seems fine.
okay, good.
And, Mr. Chairman, maybe just to facilitate and to keep everything on the record, I guess. We could come up with a form or something that says, here's why I failed the inspection, this is what you're signing off on, the person could sign it, and then we'll go ahead and sign the building card like we always do when
Perfect.
they come in.
Yes, that sounds great.
Cool.
Now, do we want a motion on this one?
I'll make a motion that we are entering into a plan with coordination between Plus and the HDC whereby a member of this board will go to the Plus office on a weekly basis as required to review any failed inspections and to make the necessary sign-offs.
All those in favor of Christine's motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Is that
Very good.
okay?
Okay, that's great. That's a good strategy for that. Okay, now, Diane, I think the next one,
You can rotate us.
you were concerned,
I have to go.
oh, you taking
Sorry.
off?
Yeah.
Go to the movies or what?
Yeah, to the movies.
My concern was,
I'm sorry. Thank you
Thanks.
so much for coming.
Yeah,
Thank you for the meeting. Thank you for everyone.
bye.
Thanks, Christine, good night.
Okay, I don't think we're supposed to name any specific projects right now, but I think that you wanted to make sure that the language in the town code, when it says residential, makes no distinction between multifamily and single-family residential. Am I correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. We know that there are certain laws that are in place for residential buildings. And if a building is commercial on the first floor and residential on the second floor, there are a bunch of directions that they must take. But if the whole building, 3 stories, is all residential, individual apartments, if you like, then is that not classified as a residential building and therefore must follow the rules of a residential building?
Yes, it only says residential.
Now, Diane, George did make a distinction. It's not a negative thing. The zoning bylaw has a 50-foot ridge restriction that's applied to residential buildings. Okay, and that came up in conversation a week or so ago. George has said that the HDC doesn't necessarily need to be the same as zoning, that we kind of have our own things. So if we decide, independent of what zoning says, that the ridge can only be 40 feet or whatever, that's our prerogative.
That's our prerogative. That's
Exactly.
under our jurisdiction.
Correct.
We are not subjected to zoning's rules as to what may be produced as a building, right?
Right. Correct.
Right?
True, there can be competing jurisdictions over the same application, and they would both apply.
Right, so if one fails and one gets going, we'll be back to see you.
Well, just to clarify, we, in determining appropriateness, can certainly be more conservative than what zoning would allow, but we wouldn't be able to approve a 60-foot ridge height.
That's correct.
Because that's prohibited by zoning.
Well, and interestingly, we theoretically could, but if we know that zoning is going to knock it down, it would be kind of pointless to
Right.
do so because they're not going to get a permit on it.
But we are an independent commission under our own rules and regulations, which is what we're trying to say here.
Yes, correct.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If I may, just to clarify, the 50-foot ridge line
Yeah.
maximum is in the general bylaw of the town.
Right.
The 40-foot height maximum is in the zoning bylaw.
Correct.
Just
Thank you.
it's
But we may
Yes, that's correct.
not accept that
Right.
particular thing.
Okay, let's move
All
along.
right, so now, item 8, zoning and HDC jurisdictional clarification.
I think she just
Was that
kinda said
basically the
that.
same thing?
Yeah,
Diane?
that's it.
Okay, so we can cross that off. Now, here's where items 12 and 14 were moved up. John, I think these are your items. The planning board and HDC interface was one.
10 and 12?
12 is,
And 14.
and 14.
12 and 14.
14 is the one that you started to discuss earlier.
What does HDC interface mean?
You're, okay, you're going on,
We're gonna discuss 12, Johnny, that
Right.
says
Oh, okay.
planning board HDC
Okay.
interface.
right,
What's interface? What's that?
The relationship
okay, let me get
between
this
the two
together.
boards.
this way. Okay, these are what came out of,
Is this the Board of Selectmen memo?
right,
Okay, so this is actually item 14.
okay, right.
So-
I'll pass.
Well, what,
I'll wait till 14.
well, do you have anything to say on item 12?
Yes, I said before, in my own opinion, that there was interference, and part of it was planning board and the selectmen, when they put HTC under that classification. It never should have been done. I say it's a special act of the legislature, HTC. has very little, unless something is voted at town meeting, to do with any other board in this, and others should not interfere with this board. It never should have happened. It's caused a lot of trouble in this town, and people are so upset from what I hear going around of the operation. Now, it's still slow, our process, right? And it's probably the best we got going right now. It's good. It's nice to have the so-called staff help us, the visitors, volunteers, you know. But I say we should have a administrator. And I'd like to ask town council's opinion on why we do not have one, if possible. Why? It should be an administrator to answer for our actions, you know. And we had a good man there before.
Is this something that you can answer?
Not
George?
really, not in a hypothetical like that, no.
I'm sorry?
I mean, the town manager had asked us an opinion somewhat related to it, which had to do with plus, HTC falling within a department supervised by plus. And it's very clear what happened with that. There was a town code provision that certain departments fall within the jurisdiction of the town manager.
Yes.
And then with an agreement between the Board of Selectmen and plus, town manager was able to delegate some of that responsibility over departments to plus, and one of the ones that she designated was HTC.
Right.
So that's where that comes from. As to an administrator, that's, for the board to decide. And it's not really a legal question, but the legality of why, for instance, like when I send a legal opinion that was approved by the town manager to provide, I will send it to plus as the department head for HTC. And I do that because of the way the town government is structured.
Right.
Mr. Pucci, I'd like to respond to my own opinion. Yes, that did happen, and we asked them to take it out. All right? And the plus went, I guess, and they talked with the selectmen, from what I understand from one of them, and they discussed the issue. And I always felt that the HTC, through the process of that, has lost its autonomy, we want to use the word, and the application started to be signed off by the plus. And I thought it was wrong at the time, and I said so. And I still feel nobody has the authority to sign off an application, and this was voted years back when Mr. Bosch first came on the board. And it was voted that the members of the commission or the administrator can only do sign-offs. This is a vote of this board. And over the years, it's changed, I say, and it's, some stuff was getting signed off that I know about that passed, okay? Right.
So now, this kind of ties in with the discussion that we had earlier,
Right.
where nobody, member of plus, John, anybody, no member of staff can sign anything off unless it looks exactly like the drawings.
Right.
If it doesn't look exactly like the drawings, it has to come back to us.
Right.
So I think, John, that's kind of a benefit in terms of the board being able to stay in touch with what's getting signed off, because if it's not meeting, if it doesn't look like the drawings, it doesn't get signed off.
Can I ask a general question?
Yes, you may, thank you.
With all the work that staff has to do, I'm just wondering, and all of this coming back with these things not being built correctly, are you overburdened? I mean, do we need more people to help staff? Because I guess that would be also part of your, who, and someone, like a head. I mean, is John the head now? I don't know. I just want to know. I don't really know.
So, Mr. Chairman, despite what Mr. McLaughlin just said, I find it offensive for him to say that you have no staff. John Hedden, sitting right down at the end of the table, his title is Historic Commission Coordinator, and he works primarily for, the HDC in doing inspections and processing applications. in helping people through the application process, and he does a really great job, and I hear nothing but good things about his work. And I think that that should be acknowledged and not made out to be like you don't have anyone helping you. And we have Kathy, who comes to your meetings. She helps process all of the paperwork that is very labor intensive, and she does a great job as well.
We have backed them all up, Leslie.
Oh, yeah.
John, Heather,
Good.
Kathy, Terry, all of them have, this is the group we work with, and this is the group that we certainly count on and who have been most informative to us
Good.
in recent times.
I'll
So,
hear that.
Johnny may have missed the appointment of John to the point of, I would like to see him as administrator, but he'll,
I think they just changed all the titles.
yeah.
And we are in the process of looking for another person. We haven't advertised the job yet. We retooled the other position a little bit. I'm sure you all remember that we had a little issue with hiring another person. And so we are working on some budgeting matters to make that happen sooner rather than later. We want to get that job advertised to a wider audience, and I'm drawing a total blank right now.
No, so you're searching for another
Yeah, but we.
another staff then?
Yeah, so we want to get out to, maybe some universities, maybe some colleges where people are,
Yeah.
trained in historic preservation and architecture or
That
building.
would be
or
great.
Those things. So that's what we want. I mean, we want you all to have like the best level of service. Over the years, we've heard your unhappiness expressed about enforcement, and a lot of enforcement is done through inspections. Now we're getting the other side of that where, we've had a staff change, we've had a structure change, and now the inspections are being done very strictly. And so I think that's getting at what you have wanted all along, except maybe more than you anticipated.
Well, I don't think that we're criticizing that. I think it's just, it was, for me, the fine component, because I felt like some things really are not an egregious, horrible error. They're just,
And I think, all staff that talks with people who have failed inspections, I just had a unhappy person that I worked with today, and he kept saying things change in the field. And I was like, I understand they change in the field. The commission understands they change in the field, but you have to keep track of that, and then at the end of the day, before you meet your CO tomorrow, correct all the paperwork and make it match, and make sure that what you've done is approved by the commission. So I think everyone's understanding of that, and we want to help guide
Change
people.
order, they know how to deal with change order.
well, I'm glad
So-
you're getting somebody else, because I was getting worried with the enforcement from the sign people, and
Oh,
then
yeah.
thinking, how can these people do all of that?
And the demo by neglect.
Right.
And we had a great meeting, when was that, a few weeks ago with the sign committee, and we talked with them about, going forward, and they talked about a lot of things that happened in the past, and I think we came to a mutual agreement that let's forget about whatever happened in the past, and let's move forward, and let's move forward in a positive kind of way. So, and that's what I think we all want to do, is to, make the most of your time as volunteers, to uphold, the architecture that you spend so much time on, and to get all that work done. So yes, we do want to hire someone else.
I hope you find somebody, that would be great.
Yes.
John?
I'll make a statement. Things are rolling along pretty well now with the people. I call them volunteers, call them staff, whatever, Things are rolling along pretty well. We might need one or more people. That's up to, if they want to find some more volunteers, that's fine, But my question to town council would be, if we wanted to make sure that we have an administrator, does the job have to be advertised, or can you hire direct from the floor?
I would need to look at a lot of documentation before I could
Okay.
answer. I would have to look at a lot before I could answer that.
Could you get back to us? Yeah, appreciate it.
Oh, I see, yeah,
In
I
other words,
understand.
should the job be advertised? or can
yeah,
you
I totally
hire
get what
outright?
you're saying.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I looked into it a couple places, and I saw 3 people that I know very well, all attorneys, and they said, no, basically, past policies are, they advertise all jobs, and so unless you're the department head that's doing the hiring, you know?
Right.
So, that's just my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Anything else on, we sort of covered items 12 and
I
14.
think you're right, together, yeah.
Yeah. So, any more discussion on those 2 items?
What, that George has to stay for?
Yeah, because basically, unless
roof
anyone
and
has a
stuff.
different opinion, this is sort of the end of the legal portion of this discussion.
Right.
We good?
Yeah.
Yes.
Everyone fine?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I'm taking George to the vote, so if anyone has anything for me before I go, then.
I think we're fine.
Okay, good.
You know, we'll follow up with anything that might come up.
Thank
But
you all.
thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for your
Thank you for
time.
coming.
Really appreciate it.
Shed the light on a lot of things.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hope you don't have to spend the night.
Oh, the snow?
Yes, it's still snowing
Oh,
out.
yeah.
Wind is worse than the snow. I'll take the snow over the wind.
Yeah, no, it's all about the wind.
Okay, so our next agenda item
Thank
is
you, Leslie.
policy on, yeah, thanks a bunch, you guys.
Yeah.
Policy on synthetic materials.
I'm sorry? What number?
We are now, John, on item number 9.
What happened to 11?
There isn't one.
Oh, there is no 11.
That's a
I have
lucky
no
number.
idea. Yeah, that's right. It's like 13 in the
Yeah, you can't
elevator.
have the-
Yeah.
Anyway, who cares? Let's go.
Okay. So, Val, I think you put this on. You've been wanting to have this on.
Yeah, because people have been asking me what is our policy? There seems to be some companies that are advertising synthetic materials.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Just like, come on over and get some synthetic materials. And I think that we need to sort of have an idea of how we want to see these be used, and then have the staff put together some kind of a notification that goes out to the lumber companies and I don't know where else we could put it, post it
Well,
somewhere.
builders, like, who's it, the Builders Association?
Yeah, because
things like that.
they're getting used more and more, and
Do you mean like, clapboard that's,
yes, and there's a fence that somebody pointed out. They didn't
Plastic.
think it's on Main Street.
Oh, no.
And
Really?
they don't look different now.
I don't know.
But now,
2 years
specifics of
later,
it.
those plastic fences
the
are terrible.
plastic
Where is
fences
that?
turn color and they, and
Did you see it?
So, without pointing anything out, we need to address it and have some sort of very overt notification go out that,
I agree with you. I think it would be helpful for this board to have very clear guidelines and policies about what synthetic materials are and aren't appropriate on Nantucket. My question is whether that needs to be a standalone thing or whether that's something that can be incorporated in the revision of Building with Nantucket in mind.
I'd like to see this addressed stat, because it's happening more and more, so let's nip it now.
But I think there are certain recommendations that we could make sooner rather than later, and then perhaps as part of the Building with Nantucket inline revision, that whoever the consultant
It could be
is
in
could take
both.
a more
Yeah,
holistic.
absolutely, they could be in both, they could be in the book.
yeah,
That we
right,
could take care of
certainly.
it now.
but you have manufacturers that are going to Marine Lumber and saying, sell this stuff. They had a cocktail party.
Well, I don't
this
remember ever okaying something. Does that come in as a violation?
I
So
just don't
I've
want the
never-
general population of Joe homeowner who's gonna replace his trim or his whatever, and there's this big advertisement that's gone out, which I think I showed you.
Yeah.
I have seen
Yeah, that
numerous.
says, hey, fiberglass, come on, like, it's a welcome, ready-to-use product, and
It's in
the
the
general
Inquirer
homeowner
Mirror.
wouldn't know,
I haven't
probably.
seen that.
And they give you a cut. and they get, you know, and they'll make
I
your
know
oil
we
go
talked
faster.
about it like on a case-by-case basis, but that is not getting out there, so.
Didn't, oh, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I have a comment. I've done a little research on that myself for my own interest. If synthetic material is gonna be used outside the old HTC areas, too now, maybe Madigan, you know, but, it may be fine because if you paint the house, trim and everything, you know, a color, one color, that's fine. But now, if you have a roof walk and you want to leave it natural, are they going to paint it brown? That's my only
Yeah, you
question with
can't.
that. What would you do about an odd color to leave it natural? No?
Any of the synthetic stuff that we're talking about has to be painted.
Yeah.
You can't and painting it brown wouldn't make it look like natural. It would not look like wood.
That's what I'm saying. That's the
Yeah.
only thing that hit my mind was if they wanted it left natural, because cedar lasts a long time. Of course, it's
I
a good
yeah,
question.
and we agreed in some places that are remote that you cannot see, it's 200 or 300 feet off the road, it's probably okay, but it's getting used as an allowable item because people don't know that it's not. So we need to.
Say maybe it's approved only on a case-by-case basis.
yeah.
But the lumber yards need to be made
Yes,
aware of that too.
Well, they have over the years been trying to
You
make,
can't stop Marine Lumber Center from selling.
whoever the guy is that sells wood at Marine Lumber. And Charlie's no longer, unfortunately, there, it seems, at Island. And,
He's there.
is he?
Yeah.
Could I make a statement that before 1950, most homes, even the summer people, you know, they had wood stone windows that would leave on the house and have the contractor take them off in the spring. And since 1950, you might not realize it, but about every house around here now has aluminum stone windows. You know? So it is a synthetic material, actually. It's not wood. But as I say, that's been approved, aluminum storm doors, you know, which is natural. So it is, you know, there should be some policy set up on those. In the old HDC, you know, they're already there. So that's another material.
Right.
I agree with what's been said. And I guess I just wonder whether the HGC is the only board or commission that would be able to influence the kinds of materials that are used. You know, sometimes my grandfather had a saying, when you give a man a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You know, so just as height and building envelopes are regulated by zoning, perhaps some of these building material issues could be regulated through the building department and code changes.
You'll never get
Nah,
them
they
to-
won't
you'll
get
never
involved
them
in that.
To stand up and
No.
have the courage to do
Do
something.
we have to then ask, well, we do on the application ask what the materials are. So
Yeah. Now, you want to hear something funny
What?
about that?
Yeah, I really do want to hear something funny.
Tragicomic. A builder came into my office and he said, "Look at this," and he showed me an application stamped that was approved where all the exterior trim was ASIC, which is all synthetic, and it was over like in Hedgesbury, and you know
I
it
remember.
was approved.
Hedgesbury, where is that?
It's off of
Main
Nantucket
Street.
Road.
Technically just an easement.
What?
It's technically just an easement.
Hedgesbury is, those are all Nantucket Road addresses. or
Yes,
Vestal.
that's right.
Yeah.
Hedgesbury is also in Stockton.
But now, so the truth is, ASIC, when you paint it, you cannot tell the difference. I think we had this conversation a few months ago with this in the board, and you know, I was doing a house over in Osterville or somewhere, and builder, you know, our spec all red cedar, and he said, "Oh, I'm going to put ASIC up," and I said, "Oh, no, you're not. You know, we only use red cedar." And he said, "Have you ever used it?" I said, "No." And he said, you come out and I'll show you. And so I got up on the ladder and he said, now that, one of these is Azek and one's red cedar. Tell me which is which. And I'm like knocking on them and everything. And like literally you can't tell. You cannot tell.
I believe there's products that are good that way, but you can't leave a blanket.
Correct. So who at the table said that it should be like anything else that you apply and it's granted on, you request it. It goes on the application and you review it. You doing all right?
Yep, sorry.
Okay. In fact, I think it was you, Diane.
Yeah, it was.
Well,
I mean,
then
I said on a case by case.
Case by case.
Right, which is fine, but I think that, I don't know what I'm trying to say. It needs to be made, they need to be made aware that they do need to apply if they want to use that product. It's not just
Yeah,
up for the
I think
grabs.
that's fair. It should,
I'm going in Home Depot and getting myself some whatever.
Well, that is an interesting point, because even if you went and told like Shepley, Marine, and Island Lumber what the policy is, and then some guy goes and buys all of his lumber at Home Depot.
Well,
and
it
then,
just happened, because they
It-
were
oh,
on the
it did?
boat with all of their,
Oh, no kidding.
and they didn't necessarily have English as the first language, and I get that, but
Yeah.
I think it's doing something to industry. If you tell, you can suggest a marine lumber not to sell it, but you can't tell them not to.
we don't have.
Well, and I think that we should have a realistic policy, because I believe that if it's a certain distance off the road, you're really not going to tell.
well, that's exactly right. So I don't know. I mean, I'm open to suggestion, just some sort of notification that if you're selling synthetic materials, tell your customers that it's
They need
in
to be
certain
applied.
areas it's okay, or in certain circumstances that they have to apply.
That's a good solution. Then it leaves it up to the customer to do what marine lumber or whatever has said to do. That doesn't hold any onus on us.
The other part of that is, their prices for true materials. I mean, if somebody's gonna say, oh, I can go to wherever,
Yeah.
Joe Schmo, ABC Lumberyard, and I can get this synthetic material, it's gonna cost me a hell of a lot less, so I'm gonna go there. But these guys are holding themselves to the true, we only can use wood, so it's not fair to them either. You see what I'm saying?
Well, okay, whoever said that you can't tell Marine Home Center that they cannot sell a particular product, that's correct.
I
can't.
said that.
Yeah.
So-
And you
No, and I'm not suggesting that. I'm
So, but at least Marine Home Center would be able to say, well, you do have to apply for that.
right.
Now, the other interesting thing is, there are certain materials that have been around for a while that, a while being, maybe 10 years, that have had a chance to weather and, see whether it actually works and all that. It doesn't discolor or chip or anything like that. And then there's other products, like this stuff is coming out all the time, where it might appear to be sort of a wonderful solution, and then 2 years from now, all of a sudden it's, all blotched with mildew or something, and, it's not a good solution. So it's kind of like, I think we have to sort of dip our toes in the water, and.
Oh, yeah, I'm not suggesting to eliminate it completely. I just think that
Well, maybe it's something
it's
we
being
have to,
presented as an option without the homeowner necessarily being aware that
Right.
they have to apply for it.
The other thing is, we do have, whenever you submit the drawings, you're submitting the application, and, I could do the application in my sleep. People just sort of fill stuff out. But the reality is, if you say red cedar instead of pine, you're supposed to be using red cedar instead of pine, even at the end of if at the end of the day, when they paint out, they look the same. So what I'm saying is, if you're using a synthetic material, it's supposed to show up on the application.
But there is plenty of home repairs that are done without coming to HDC. Oh, I'm just replacing my trim boards.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It's
Because like, who do you get the information to?
It's to get the homeowner the information is where I'm
The
trying to
homeowner,
go through
the
all
builder.
this. Right.
You know?
Well, I mean, I know that NPT does clinics and workshops with homeowners and builders about appropriateness and materials. They usually have one at least once a year. You know, perhaps this board could partner with NPT or another organization, or simply do it on its own, and have twice yearly clinics or workshops or presentations discussing this very topic.
Right, I know that Michael May likes my house. He wants me to sign it over to him, but I don't have the money to sign it over to him. But I had to put the corner board on the house, if you remember, this past fall.
Yeah.
And the piece of material that the builder brought to show me was pretend, fake
No kidding.
wood. And he said, you can't tell the difference. And I said, I know I can't tell the difference, and you may not be able to tell the difference. But if they come and poke a knife into my wood to see whether the whole house is historic the way it's supposed to be, and it comes out as being a fake piece of wood, then I've destroyed something that's supposed to be done some way. So that it has its purposes for having it as a, idea by idea piece of wood. If it's the house that's 40, 100 feet off the road and it has square pillars and they want to have plastic pillars that you can't tell the difference, that's something we should be able to consider and decide what is the best way to go at it,
Right.
but not just giving carte blanche or complete denial. It all depends, is it not, right?
One thing I should have said but didn't is that synthetic material should absolutely never be used on an old house where there's historic fabric, because I don't care how well it paints up or anything, it won't have the same sort of patina that you have on your old wood. It will never, it'll always look wrong.
Right.
Always.
It'll be probably more perfect
It'll be
Yeah.
too perfect.
that,
Yeah,
that
and
the
it'll,
old wood
it'll
has.
stand out,
Back to your point, case by case.
yeah.
Yeah,
But I think it's safe to say, I mean, I hope we all agree that, like,
No, no.
any old historic house in downtown Nantucket, like, no synthetic anything.
So you don't think it's worth putting like a memo together and
oh, I do think
Sure.
it's worth.
yeah,
Absolutely.
I think so. I think the one area that I'd like to perhaps argue for a little more nuance is that, thus far in our conversation, we've been talking about old historic buildings that don't use synthetic materials when, there are historic buildings that do use synthetic materials, particularly more modern buildings that may be classified as historic.
Oh,
So
okay.
post-war buildings,
Yeah,
so I think the case-by-case basis idea in general works well. Advocating for in-kind replacement is generally a really good idea, and any changes from in-kind replacement applicants should submit an application for review, and their application should notate what their material choices may be. I certainly think that it would be a great idea to have an information sheet about different kinds of materials that this board approves the use of, and potentially materials that we don't think are appropriate within the historic district.
Right.
And that we have, educational sessions a few times each calendar year, to meet with the public and with builders and contractors.
I think that's a good idea for people who actually apply for things.
Okay, this is a really stupid idea, but what about having, like at one of the farmer markets we could have a stand that says HDC, and we could have different materials that we, that we're okay with. Because I actually don't know, but that way it would get into the public.
The only danger in doing that is that, to Matthew's point, where if a guy walks up and he's got a house from like the 60s, you're going to have a different answer for him than if he walks up and he's got a house from, the 1860s.
Well, as a board, I think
wouldn't be for the-
as a board, I think it would be very, it might be problematic for us to say, we recommend this, we can recommend a generic product that's like this, but can we recommend a specific brand?
No.
No.
We get into
So we have to
huge
toe a
issues
very,
with the
we have to toe
legal
a very,
issues.
a very fine line about
Yeah.
how we articulate our recommendations.
Correct.
So how do we educate the public? Or how do we educate ourselves?
I guess
need to
all
know,
I
too.
want is to say, Joe Schmo supplier, material supplier, please, be aware that
We're not going to okay.
it's not a carte blanche thing for people to come in here. You need to make them aware they need to apply.
Well, it's an easy thing to be able to hit the three that are there more than three?
No, but we
Shepley,
could,
Shepley Island,
Island, and Marine.
I like what you said about the Builders Association and
Oh,
that kind of
definitely.
thing.
And
Could
a lot of people go to those meetings.
Yeah.
could we print up, it couldn't cost very much, a green sheet
Yeah.
that said that and have them at Marine Lumber at the checkout and at Shepley, they deliver, and the Island at the checkout thing, and then they could give one with an order, or somebody could stand there and read it and say, oh, maybe I better,
I know you can't police everything, but you could at least
Try.
try.
Yeah.
Val, I have a suggestion. I know you have a lot on your plate, but I know this issue is also one that's really important to you. You asked for it to be put in today's agenda. It might be helpful for you. I know we're not the first historic district to think about these kinds of issues. Maybe you could gather some information about what other HDCs, what kind of information sheets they put out, and use that to draft a first version of an info sheet that we could review.
Mm-hmm. I
Okay.
love it.
put that on your list.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
If I could add one, I got a few questions lately, is brick veneer.
On chimneys?
Yeah,
Now, interestingly, there's brick veneer and there's brick veneer.
right.
There's, we call them lick 'em and stick 'em bricks,
Yep.
which are like basically that thick, and you just paste them onto plywood.
Oh, I would.
They have no depth, right? I mean, I'm embarrassed to say this, but like I used to have that like on the floor in my kitchen, as linoleum. It's totally fake. It looks fake. But then there is brick veneer, which is literally like you take a whole brick
And slice it.
and you cut it
Yeah,
so that you actually get the depth of the grout joint and
right,
everything.
it's corner, yeah.
That you would never ever be able to tell that it was not real brick.
Right.
So unfortunately,
It is real brick.
well, it is, but it's not like a full solid brick.
Right.
It's a veneered brick.
Half it.
Right.
Yeah. So what more can I tell you about that one?
I told, authentic material should be used, but in
We're
that case,
preferring.
exterior.
What's the second question?
Just to finish up on that, so the distinction between, well, unfortunately, you have, when someone says brick veneer, it
Right.
could mean two very different things.
Right, no, it's,
So you can say brick veneer, first of all, it's not acceptable like down where you can see it, but like up
Right.
on a chimney,
Right.
particularly if you're using like a metal flue or something like
Yeah,
that, you use it, but it has to be real brick
Yeah.
that's cut
yeah.
and applied as a veneer, as opposed to like a
Stick
sheet,
'em up.
as opposed to a sheet of something. Right. Yes, John?
When you first come out with them,
Yeah.
They were called Decor 410s. And the guy in Madigan, thank God, he's way over across the bridge somewhere. He applied for it. Well, we'll take a sample and try it and look at it, you know?
Yeah.
So, we looked at it after 6 months or whatever, we reviewed it, you know? It looks great, you know? A year later, one's missing here.
Oh,
one's-
no,
the glue-
it's all
there was a
falling
glue
apart.
on the brick, you know?
Ah.
So
Yeah.
we stopped using them, you know?
Well, I think that, isn't it, couldn't you say we prefer
Yeah,
re-
that's- I mean,
real
that's been my
materials,
response,
not,
you know.
not veneers? And, if they push enough for it, blah, 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 if it's a, what's it called, if you don't have that much money to do it, or if it's a hardship, you could, not to stick them, but you could do
The
the
veneer.
veneer.
Case by
But now
case
there's the-
basis.
Yeah.
How can, it'd be very hard on most inspections to tell the difference from the distance that you're doing the inspection.
Impossible.
From the road.
Right.
You know, so.
Because it is a real material, it's
Yeah.
just thin.
Yeah.
Right, and then for those cases where people would like to, say, remove the historic chimney from a historic house,
Right.
but then replace it with just a chimney,
Right.
this board, if it found it was appropriate to use the thinner, I guess, yeah, the second kind of veneer that you described.
The real brick.
The real
veneer.
brick that's
The good
cut,
veneer.
I guess we could make that determination, or we could determine that since the chimney stack is structural, that they need to retain the entire thing.
We have agreed to brick veneer many times on fake chimneys and other places, and it,
I don't think I'd call that a veneer.
what do you call that?
A real veneer.
It's brick, real brick.
Real brick, but it's not as thick
There's
as,
no rule about how thick it has to be.
and whether it has
Ah.
plywood in behind it or the other end of the brick. But we have used that
Oh, yeah.
Anyway,
lots of times. So,
I'll draft something.
Now, John, you had, you said you had 3 things.
No,
No,
that was
you
it.
have two,
That was it?
or just one.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so are we good on synthetic materials?
Yeah,
All right, solar roof shingles.
I got some approved.
You did?
I was the first one. They
Yes.
came and did the presentation, Dow from Michigan.
Yeah.
And it's the Barretts on Dukes Road.
Uh-huh.
Scott and Renee.
And,
How'd you get that through?
We applied and it was decided that it would be sort of a test case.
What number Dukes?
all right,
I can't remember the exact number, but I have to say,
Here, John.
it looks better on some color roof shingles than others.
Oh, it's,
wow, this is really them?
No, this is examples, but
Bless you.
you can see them, they're kind of shiny.
What's the address, Val?
I think it's 48 Dukes, but I'll have to look up specifically.
48 Dukes.
I'll look it up right now.
Okay, so you can tell the difference.
That might be the wrong address. It's Dukes Road. though.
well,
is it over the asphalt shingle?
No,
they took
it
the
is the
asphalt.
shingle.
It is the shingle.
It's the shingles.
down, and they left a rim, didn't you leave like a foot
Yeah, all the way
all
around.
the way around it? We let them play with it so that we could sort of see what it looked like, whether it could be used downtown.
If I had read this, I'd have brought you a picture of
Which
it.
one did you use?
It was a darker color. It was Dow was the product.
Right,
Oh.
we're the forerunner.
Because I don't think we have much of a precedence for the slate.
No,
Hit it with a hammer, cracked.
these 3 are out, you know,
Yeah.
this is Mediterranean and these both look like slate. And then, so the one on the far right is
Is the most.
that's sort of like a
Asphalt
3-tab
shingle,
looking thing.
There's slate roofs on Nantucket.
There are slate roofs.
Do you have a
There are
picture?
just-
I'm looking for the exact address, but I don't have very good luck using my phone to find anything.
number is this? Where are we?
This is I'll try and speed it up. It's item 10.
I mean, in terms of policy, I think
It's a case by case.
it's a case-by-case issue.
Yeah, but you know, it's nice to approve things that are sort of out in the middle of nowhere, very low visibility, see how it all works out, check in with it, like John said, a year later, see if the things are falling apart.
We approved another
these-
house.
are these
Do
solar
you remember
panels?
what house it was?
Yeah, but they're solar, but they're
I
actual
have
shingles.
them, yeah.
You have one?
They're on the solar, okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I can, I
Yeah.
was, this kind of came in by a roofer that comes in the office quite a bit, and he was asking me about it. He says, what's the HDC about, the solar roof shingles? And, as I said, there's.
31
case-
Dukes.
Case by case, but these are, I've been talking to Lauren Sinatra in our office, she's the energy coordinator, and works a lot with the solar and everything. And she says these are from Tesla, they're actually not even out yet.
Yeah, I've heard
She
about
said
those.
These are due to come out, I think, later this year, I think even towards the end of the year. And so she said, this type of style is and she predicts there'll be other companies that kind of replicate this, in a year or two as well, so.
Because Dow came with the tiles.
Yeah, from Michigan.
From Michigan,
To do
he
the-
had- he
he
had-
had the sample and.
On a board, so we could see everything, and they really were a lot better looking than the solar panels. The only thing that we didn't know was whether they generated the same amount of electricity that the panels do.
Yeah, they probably don't.
But you could use them, the stuff that he showed us, you could use.
Okay, so that's the Dow that you have at Duke's Road, so we can check that one out. Tesla will be waiting for another 10 years. They're behind on everything.
Yeah,
And I thought there was one other house that we approved.
With shingles?
Yeah, with the solar shingles, for some reason, it sticks in my mind, but I can't think where it was.
I think it would be good for all of us to take a look at them and sort of
Yeah.
evaluate
Get it.
over time, see how they're
Now, if you
working.
can't see it from the road, I have pictures, so I will bring them,
Okay.
so you can see.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for a new build,
Yeah.
these could be quite, depending on the circumstances,
Yeah.
quite appropriate. Putting them on a more historic property, it would just have to depend.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
13?
So we're good with the solar shingles for now?
Yeah.
Now we are 13. Who put that on?
What does it say?
Updating the surveys.
I don't know, but I do have a question about that.
Yeah,
It usually wasn't it the Preservation Institute that did those initially?
You okay, Diane?
I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
I'm also, I just have to go, so I was just doing it quietly as I could.
Interestingly, I had lunch with Michael May, and he said, you really got to update those surveys. And I said, yeah. And I thought that he said that he was somehow involved in doing it.
He was.
I thought so.
The
I have
last
to check
one.
back in with
Did he
him.
do it in the last one?
I do have a question for you, though, as an aside.
Okay.
Last week, when we were talking about Three Hawk Circle and demoing it, and you had gotten some information on it was a contributing structure, I don't remember where that came from, but in following through with what I had to do to get the approval was to put together a history of what fabric was left. The whole entire house was built in 1978, not 1969 like it said in the assessors,
Okay.
by Howard Jellamy. I mean, I got this whole, and it was
Son
the
of a gun.
plan and everything, so it was like,
Wow.
I wanted to know where it came from and where we get that contributing stuff from.
So there are different places to get information depending on what historic district we're talking about.
Right.
So there is the local Nantucket Historic District. And my understanding is that there are copies of those local survey sheets at the Plus office.
Yep.
In the HDC files. So there are some copies of those at the NHA. And there are copies of those, I think, in the State Historic Preservation Office in Boston. The state and federal historic districts basically overlap. When, as I understand it, when the federal historic districts, the National Register districts, and then later the National Historic Landmark District, when they were approved, the state automatically enters them into the state register. Okay, and you can get copies of those designation reports from the National Park Service, from the State Historic Preservation Office, and Michael May also has a paper copy. And then as part of that, the designation report will have a narrative that describes the historic district and why it's important. And it's accompanied by a series of, it's accompanied by a spreadsheet. It's an Excel spreadsheet, basically, that lists each property by address and parcel number, date of construction, whether it's considered to be contributing or not contributing, and then notes.
Okay.
And Michael May has a paper copy. It's easy enough to get digital copies of that spreadsheet. And so it's looking at that spreadsheet that I often am able to determine whether something is considered to be contributing or not to that historic district.
Okay.
I've not seen, but I imagine that they must exist, individual survey sheets for each property.
Here.
Either here or in the State Historic Preservation Office that have the information that was consolidated into that spreadsheet.
Wasn't there some?
Goodbye, Diane. See you later.
See you later. I just want to say, wasn't there some argument, Val, between on some of the recommendations of the HDC? Somebody said that some of our stuff wasn't.
That's the local, the surveys that the HDC office has, I think the Preservation Institute has done over time. Students do them.
Some of the PIN students have participated in collecting survey information. Some of the early, in general, not just in Nantucket, but in lots of places, when the historic preservation movement was getting started, historic districts were new. People would do surveys of buildings in order to assess them. And that survey information gets outdated. We learn more about buildings and their history. Buildings get replaced. Alterations happen to buildings. So there's always a desire to do new surveys in order to provide more complete information, so that more nuanced assessments can be made about what's considered about the value of older structures, and whether they are found to be significant or not. Certainly that was done between 2000 and 2012, when the new National Historic Landmark listing was approved at the Park Service.
For everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the buildings from the 1970s and the 1960s. In fact, most of the post-war buildings on Nantucket aren't. I don't even know if there are survey sheets for them.
I don't think so.
So those were assessed for that revised NHL listing.
So essentially, it's really not in our purview to update them.
It's certainly, I disagree. I think that for our purposes, for the local historic district, if we feel that there's a need to update the surveys, we certainly can.
But who would do it?
I agree. Yes, John.
I was informed that, I guess this would work similar to the way building with Nantucket in mind would work, is hiring a consultant to do the work.
To do the actual survey work
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty
for the
typical.
HTC?
Yeah.
So it'd be something that would need some funding.
It's typical.
Wow,
You know,
okay.
even in,
All right.
I mean, in places where, like in Westchester County, outside of Manhattan, there were some communities that they're not listed as a historic district, but there was community interest that there be one, and so that community hired a preservation consultant. They issued an RFP. And that consultant worked to do surveys and present recommendations to that community, which led to a National Register listing. You know, there are several people here on the island, either permanent residents or seasonal visitors that do that kind of consulting work. And then, of course, there are lots of graduate school programs. The one at UMass Amherst, there's a preservation program there.
Are those the kids that came last year?
No, that was
There's the
Worcester Tech, Worcester Poly.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with their program. You know, certainly the University of Florida's Preservation Institute in Nantucket would be a good group to reach out to. There are a lot of potential candidates for someone who could update, to do an updated survey.
13.
if that's something that was interesting.
Yeah, because
that
I
we would
had a
listen to.
question on that Pocomo house that is kind of a tech house.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
don't know where that falls. I mean, I know it's not, I mean, I don't know, is it a historic house? Because
Wait
in
long
a
enough,
way,
it'll be-
if you wait long enough, but also, I think we also say we can demolish certain homes, that I'm just wondering if we had a professional saying, you know, the tech house on Pocomo that they wanted to switch, that probably went through. while I
Oh,
was gone.
yeah, I'll explain it all to you later.
Oh, okay.
It was a whole weird thing.
Is that the one moving across the street?
Yeah.
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 But the one that they were able to tear down was like a 1970 something.
Exactly.
Well, the pink house got ripped down.
The pink, well, that was.
I have the
that's-
original blueprints.
Oh, lucky you.
that's, you
Was
know,
it done by
because
Philip Johnson?
Evans House.
I'll have to look.
That's what the rumor is.
But how, you know, I think
Mr.
that should
Evans
be included in a survey. Some of these houses have certain merit, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally agree.
I mean, in general, the state and national register listings
I know.
identify historic
My aunt and uncle
resources,
lived out
and
there.
then the local historic preservation commissions protect them. That's normally how it works. Nantucket's a really interesting and unique case because the whole island is a district. And so, you know, just in terms of how many properties, buildings, structures, and sites there are to regulate, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Especially given the human resources that we have available
Right.
here. It's not like we're the Landmarks Preservation Commission in New York City with a staff of, you know, dozens and dozens.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
the good thing is that we're not starting from ground zero.
Mhm.
You know, there are already surveys in place. The National Historic Landmark listing has just been updated just a few years ago. And it makes recommendations for what is considered to be contributing and non-contributing with regarding that designation. So those are all really good places to start.
I love having you on this committee.
Yeah,
Let me
Anybody
just say
remember
that.
Vince Backer?
Thank you, Val.
sure.
Years ago, he used to be a selectman.
Yep.
They called him secret. They called him Snowball.
He looks
had
like
long,
Santa
short white
Claus.
hair, long beard and everything.
Yep.
But anyway, it made me think. He built a house out in
Old, what do
Quick
you call it?
nap.
Walnut.
Well,
Not Walnut.
Quidnet.
Quidnet.
He built a house in Quidnet.
like a
On
barn.
the first floor,
Yes.
he put it down. He
Remember this
He used that
house.
Decor 410. The whole first floor.
Oh,
was all
no.
brick. You walk in there. Of course, it had a little raised lip to it, you know. You trip over the thing, you know. On the outside, he didn't buy the smooth type. He bought the one that had like a little wrinkle in it. He would walk in the house, he kept tripping.
On the floor?
Yeah. The whole floor. You see the house. The first house on the right, and you're going Quidnet. Well, I just remember that.
Well, I'm glad you
I
shared
remember
that.
too much.
But, I mean, circling back to, the surveys, I think that your example, Val, of, the house at Hawk Circle, where the information that you were able to uncover doing in-depth research differed from what information was in the survey.
I know, I should have done that first.
It makes me question some of the dates of construction and some of the assessments that are in the NHL.
They're frequently wrong.
They are, and, just because a building, say, I'm happy to take the period of significance that's listed in the NHL at face value, but in terms of evaluating particular buildings as having integrity to that period of significance, I'm not sure that I necessarily always trust those assessments. So I think it would be helpful to have additional survey work done.
Number 15.
I'm gonna do that.
We hire somebody.
I mean, just like the
I
board
know.
applied for CPC funding for building with Nantucket in line, I would think it
Vodka.
would be certainly possible for the board to apply for CPC
Who,
funding. for something like that.
who puts together the application for that?
I guess this board would just designate someone.
Yeah.
It's just filling out an application?
Yeah.
That's it? Okay.
I mean, I guess we first have to vote on that, something that we would want to do, and then designate someone to put that together.
Yeah, I think it'd be great.
So why don't I just, why don't I put that down, well, we're a very short board next Tuesday. Christine, Val, and you, Matthew, are not going to be here.
Right.
So why don't we put it on as
Going to hire.
other business for the following week? This-
Oh,
Oh,
I'll wear my
Is
Cupid
that,
outfit.
Well, is the 14th a Tuesday?
The next meeting after,
Okay.
next Tuesday.
So, it would, under other business, it would simply say, discussion of CPC funding for, researcher for,
Updating the
historic,
surveys.
I was gonna say historic documentation, updating, the survey forms.
When was the last one done? 2012? Is
Uh,
that the last one? Or,
That was the state and federal one, right?
Right, I
2012.
think, at that meeting, we can talk about it more, but I think it would be good for us to reach out to MPT and the State Historic Preservation Office and understand what kind of surveying was done to update
Oh.
the NHL in 2012, and if there are more in-depth survey sheets, that we get copies of them
Mhm.
for here,
Thanks.
and then we can better evaluate what resources they looked at. Did they just do a windshield survey?
Right.
And understand where we're starting from
Yeah.
in order to make recommendations for how to move forward.
Okay, so that discussion we can have other business on the 14th. Okay? Now, listen, folks, I think we're losing our board slowly, and I believe, aren't you, you're not feeling so well?
I
Am I allowed to make
picked
that
up some.
public?
Yeah, I think that people understand if I go
So-
out the door.
We're losing our board. What board?
Two members are now gone, and the third, I think, is, what I'm suggesting is that maybe, should we just call it a night? Have we covered enough, or does
well,
anybody else?
what else do we have?
Okay, so what we have here is architectural guidelines consent guide. John Hedden, was that something that you put on?
Yeah, I mean, that's just in reference to some of the, I believe a lot of it falls in building with Nantucket in mind, to be honest, some of the guidelines and as far as,
We really have to do that update of that book, because so many of these are falling under that.
Enforcement again, was that you, John, that put that on there?
Yeah,
Enforcement relating to what?
just infractions that people see and similar to the signs. You know.
Is this stuff that we could move to another meeting, or do we have to have another organizational meeting? Like, could it?
No,
The 3 items left, you wanna have it next week, and next
Any of
week?
these items-
not gonna be here.
And this is just a organization, but these items are gonna come.
I'm good, I'm good, I'm good for another 20 minutes if you wanna get through the whole thing.
Forget the HDC checklist. That was my idea, but
Okay, go to that one.
it's a good idea.
well, I happened to make one.
You made a checklist? Didn't I see something that sort of had colors?
Yeah, but John says the brochure kind of goes through that
Yeah,
now
I
that
mean,
they
we
have,
just
so.
have one in the office that's with the
Yeah.
packet that's been approved.
It was an attempt to, our meetings can be shorter if people have all their information, you know, like, oh, I had a picture I put in the file last time I was in here, bring it with you every time, bring, you know,
Right,
so that we're not like,
yeah,
but it's not that important right now, so we can
okay.
ixnay that.
Now, interesting, design advisory
was me
committee.
too.
Yeah, well, that's another good one. You know, we used to have a design advisory committee.
What's that?
What it was basically, and I don't want to generalize, but I will. You have an architect coming from off island. They've never done a house on Nantucket before. They think they get, like, they've looked at building with Nantucket in mind, and they think that they know how to do it. And they come in and you unroll the drawings and you say like, oh man, it's like so far off, we don't even know where to start.
Right.
And so rather than spend hours and hours and hours, like basically trying, and you know, frankly, we've got a couple on the books right now that are like this, where we're just, you know, month after month, you know, coming in with more stuff, and they're just not getting it. Well, the design advisory committee was comprised of, you know, some architects and designers, and basically they would meet on an as-needed basis. Okay, if there was a project that we found to be like just so far off, we didn't even know where to begin with it, we just said, you know what, you should spend an hour and a half with design advisory. And then, you know, the design advisory would get together and they'd sort of, like, we're not supposed to be making recommendations about how to redesign your building. We're just supposed to say what we're critical of. But the architects would sit down and say like, oh, well, wait a minute, you know, you can't do this, and this is what additive massing is, and, you know, your window sizes are all wrong. And then, so they basically, it's much less formal, and then they'd come back with something that was much closer to being approvable. So was that you that brought?
I brought it up,
Yeah,
yeah,
'cause it was great.
Yeah, and,
While it lasted.
right, Neil was great on there.
Neil,
Parent.
yeah, you know, Chris Holland was on
Yeah.
it, Mickey Rowland was on
They
it.
volunteer their time to just help out with these projects, and the office doesn't have to sit down and try to sort it out for them. It's just purely to help people who are way off in the,
It sounds like it might be beneficial to revive it.
yeah.
You know, I guess my only concern is that it's already difficult for us to have people on the advisory committees
I know.
that we have.
You mean just getting the talent?
Yeah. Do you
Yeah.
think that there are enough practitioners, architects and designers on the island who would be willing to participate in such a thing?
I actually think there would be.
So that's great.
Because I obviously know all of the architects and designers, as you guys do, and I talk to them, you know, every now and again about running, oh, too much work, you know, to be on the board is, you know, too much, I can't, I've got young kids. But if you said,
Yeah.
whoa, but these guys, you know, you might only meet once a month for an
If
hour and a
that.
half.
Yeah,
I
that
mean,
would be
it's-
And they'd be like, okay, sure,
Yeah, give it a first run through.
yeah.
if you're a contractor, it's very bad for business to get involved, you know? I tell you.
Oh, yeah.
They go say, well, that son of a gun didn't recommend that for me, but it helped him, you know, yeah, that happens.
There were a lot of builders
Small
on
towns,
that.
you know.
Yeah.
But we would recommend
Yeah.
to the architect from off island that they go see this.
When they're
environment.
looking at us like the deer in the headlights,
Yeah.
you can just say, hey, listen, go, these guys can meet with you and help you
Yeah,
out and give you some sort of.
Like the castle that was gonna be up beyond Lincoln Circle, remember that? Big house. I don't.
Anyway,
Real
that,
big?
Really.
Bigger
big.
than that, John, bigger.
so maybe we could informally poll people
I will.
and see if there is an interest, and
Yeah.
then,
Yeah.
I think if
19.
there's a way to email submission, I mean, that's mostly what happens now anyways, is people email me stuff from Elf Island and say, what do you think, or sometimes it's in the advisory.
that's even easier, because
Yeah.
they could
The advisory,
shoot it to the design people, they don't all have to physically be there, and
it
Right.
could be
Great idea.
If it was an established committee, and I could do one at a time or something, you know, instead of them
Getting together.
having some sort of email meeting, you know, if it was designated, shoot it, you know. to
Well,
this
here's an
person,
interesting
shoot to
thing.
that person, shoot to this
So,
person.
I just was starting to think about the legality of that. Like, when you
Yeah.
do your historic structures, that's noticed, right?
Exactly. So I think it would be okay to, we just need to be careful about OML
Yeah.
and that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, that's exactly.
So, you know.
Even if it's emailed, I think, couldn't that constitute a meeting?
right.
Yeah, so I think
Oh.
it would be problematic for the design advisory committee to review it virtually together and issue comments. But you could, like you do with us, it's certainly fine to share drawings and plans amongst the committee members
Right,
in that way.
right, which I've done quite often is with Matthew and some of the other advisory boards, is when they come in for sconce that are in town, and we can often shoot it to one of the members, and usually kind of take turns rotating them around and just getting some initial input from one member.
Yeah.
All right, well, TBD.
Yeah.
What more to do?
Well, I mean, if it's something that we're interested in, then we should act on it. We should either, put it on the agenda for the next, for an upcoming meeting to have further discussion and vote on whether we should establish this, or, make a motion now to, to get a group together, or,
And then-
or assign someone the task
Well,
of
if they're not, if they're
polling the
shot
community.
individually,
if
then
that's-
they're not, that's not an open meeting law violation. If the emails are shot to say there are
Correct.
5 people,
Right, right.
and they each got this particular application that was beyond something we had to start, then
Right.
Yeah.
they're not meeting, they're not more than
Right.
2 people. And
I think it's ideal if everybody's in person.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
but
Yeah.
the example of coming from up island.
Right,
is-
right.
Well, they don't have to be there in person
Right.
necessarily.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But the
they
board
could
could
send
meet,
Oh,
friends,
true.
and they
I
could, Skype or something.
Yeah.
well, you know the architects. Why don't you get a group of architects together?
I know
that
I
might
could do
say-
that. And it could even be a rotating group.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yes,
It could be
everybody's
just
in.
a pool of people.
They'd be
Yeah.
happy to contribute.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
Myself included.
yes.
So how would we do that? Would we put it on an agenda and just ask people if you're interested to contact the office or contact
Usually
you?
put it in the paper, advertise it.
Yeah.
The committee.
So what I want to make sure of, I'll talk to enough people to see if we've got
A core?
yeah, a
Okay.
group that
Okay.
are willing to commit. And then once they're willing to commit, then I'll say, okay, I think we can launch this.
Okay,
We should be able to have a statement of purpose, I think, for the,
Yeah.
for the committee.
Right.
Just, this is what the committee does, this is what its jurisdiction is, it's making these recommendations for this purpose.
I think Joe Homeowner too used to use it once in a while when
Oh,
they
yeah.
wanted to do
Oh,
something.
frequently. Those were easy.
Okay,
All right.
good.
19?
Applications handled through staff.
Who put that on there?
Kind of gone over that.
We sort of have.
Yeah.
They'd have to, staff doesn't have any jurisdiction or anything to sign any applications as far as.
What this had to do with, so I think this was along the lines of our discussion where if, wouldn't it be nice if somebody came in and they wanted to have like, change their roof color from black to gray, you know, in Gnaw Shop, and they come in to the door and John looks at it and he goes, oh, well, you're approved. Because it's, you know, basically straightforward. So it would even avoid the whole consent aspect of things, but I don't think that, according to George, that's not legal.
Yeah, I
It
wish
has to be a member of the board.
Yeah, I wish it were
Yeah.
available, but, you know, at the very least, staff can make recommendations.
Yeah.
And, for the consent agenda.
Right.
Definitely.
All right. Policy for old business submissions.
This was something some of the administrative specialists are hoping when they come in and submit their old business, they don't have a minutes attached to it or.
Well, that has to
a
do with my
label-
checklist too.
A label of, right, exactly, that could go on there of what meeting it went to, what the address is, what the honor is. It's just, here's some drawings. And it's, I don't know if it's a policy or if it's just common practice that we've always requested that the minutes be brought in, a set of minutes are brought with their old business submission.
Wait, is this your checklist?
Yeah.
And does it include that?
It has, that bits of information, yeah.
Now, this is not. in-
Official.
No.
I just wanted
No.
you guys to think about it.
So at the moment, there is no checklist for old business stuff?
No, not for old business, yeah. It would just be for new submissions.
So basically, it's up to whoever is at the front desk accepting the application
Right.
to look at it and see whether everything is included?
Right, yeah.
But they
That's sort of
don't-
dangerous.
And they don't have a checklist to.
Well,
go to?
Well, with the old business, you know, when
Right.
somebody's been remaining in.
Well, and then at the bottom, I put, HDC staff is not responsible to review applications for completeness of this list immediately upon submittal, because you know how it gets like a frenzy?
Yeah.
Review all your documentation and drawing requirements carefully before submitting your application. It is your responsibility to ensure your application and materials are complete. Incomplete submissions will not be heard at a meeting.
Love it.
I agree with that 100%. We keep getting difficulty with that.
It is helpful if you have previous minutes from other meetings, a copy of historic documentation, photos, examples. I mean, I kind of tried to touch on each new, old, and in general.
Why can't we incorporate that into
Well-
the application?
Well, you guys
Yeah.
should look
So
at
here-
it, though.
Right, so here's the
Seen
thing.
that, I think. Didn't you do that months ago?
We should all take this home.
I didn't make
And,
enough
and
copies.
you guys should definitely review this and see whether there's anything that needs to be added or.
So let's give it to them, and he can look at it, and then send it to us,
And then
because
we
I didn't
can-
make enough
We
copies.
can ratify
Can you
it.
send this in an email? Can you send it to me in an email?
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
and that's the copy for the record.
right.
Thanks, Val.
Yeah,
That's very
thank you.
helpful. Okay, 21, policy on requesting copies of COA.
That's
Stamp.
me, I just did that.
Yeah, so we have folks that come in and misplace their COAs and stamped drawings. You actually didn't do that, but, because yours was a step through, you just never.
Oh.
And they request copies of the COA, the approval, and the sets of stamped plans so they can submit it for the building permit.
Because they've lost their own?
Right,
Yeah, because
their
it's like from
building
2 years
application.
ago or whatever.
Yeah.
And to me, it just seems any builder could kind of come in and make those, request those copies and bypass the architect altogether, or designer, and apply for the, you know.
Let me make sure I understand.
They would need to be signed out somehow, you know, when folks come in and pick up their approvals, we have them sign out, so we know who signed out their.
Right.
Well, it should be the agent,
Right, exactly.
and if
Right.
it's not the agent, it should be, yeah. He's saying like somebody could come in and ask for a copy of a plan that you did
Yeah, and got approved.
and got approved.
Yes.
And have it stamped and get, the yellow
Right, yeah.
copy so they could get a permit. Cause say you've decided you're not gonna work together and they wanna circumvent you for some reason, or, is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, well, sure.
Yeah.
When I worked for HTC, that came up, that exact same thing came up. And I thought somebody's trying to bypass.
Right.
And I asked about it, and we were told, you can't,
Yeah,
you can't
I've
limit
actually
who
done-
can pick it up.
Right, right. So,
Which I actually think is true. Interestingly though,
Because
there,
it's public information.
yeah.
It's a public document.
that's true.
Food for thought.
Yeah.
Okay, but, so, one thing that you said, that which is a really kind of simple, if not remedy to that, but at least it charts it,
Right.
is the idea of signing it out,
Right, yeah.
which you said you do not have in place right now.
No, there is a sign out sheet, yeah.
For the copies?
Not for the, well,
Sure.
for when they pick up their originals, there's a sign out sheet.
Right.
But-
So you're suggesting to have a sign-out sheet, so if somebody requests copies,
Right,
you have a
right.
sign-out sheet to show that copies of this particular set of
Right,
drawings
yeah,
went
yeah.
out to this or that person,
Something of that nature.
in case anyone ever wanted to call them to task.
Right, right.
You have a record that they went out.
On the logbook that we have.
Yeah,
Friday, they didn't make a column, or maybe if they made copies, because they write on the map and parcel, HTC file, building file.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah, some other copy book or record of it.
Because that whole right side is more used.
Right,
I don't know.
right.
Yeah. It's a good thought.
Instead of having another book up there.
Be more of like a copying record or something.
Yeah, yeah.
What documents you would be, which documents you.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Right.
Compose.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I could see restricting
Yeah.
the original copy, the one true copy that's supposed to go to the agent or the owner, you know,
Right, right.
it's that
exactly.
stamped copy.
Right.
But any reproductions of the town of Nantucket's stamped copy,
Right, right, yeah.
you know,
Public
it's public.
document.
It is public.
A historian who's doing research could request a copy.
Right,
You know, a
Right.
neighbor could request a copy.
right,
You know,
right.
but having a method to log that information, you know, and I presume that you're charging a copy fee.
Yeah, you do that. yeah.
So, you know, tracking that.
Right.
We
would be-
don't write down who, like, if you come in and get like $10 worth of copies, we don't write down $1 worth of copies, like your name, we just pay the dollar and you leave and you get the receipt.
Oh, okay.
So he's suggesting having like a log.
Well, it doesn't happen
Yeah.
that often, does
No.
it?
No, but I mean, I always just think somebody might be bypassing someone
No,
else
I
who
know.
did the work and, you know.
Listen, if they're
Or paying.
bypassing, it's
I
gonna
mean,
get
It's
discovered.
a crime
Yeah.
anyway, so,
Yeah.
it's, you know, they're legal, it's public documents, so.
You wanna approve the minutes?
No, just mentioning it's gonna be brought up.
On the minutes,
Oh,
December 22nd has a very specific motion.
oh, yes,
And
yes,
something
yes.
came up on the January 17th ones, and I don't want those approved, because I have to go back and type in the discussion about how Theodorakis's house move was approved.
Yeah,
Because that
right.
discussion was on the 17th. Anyway, but, so the motion for the 22nd is motion to amend the previously, wait a minute, I looked it up, amend the previously adopted minutes to delete all references to Glazer as a voting member in individual project hearings. Wait a minute.
Who wants to make that motion?
I will. I don't have to repeat it.
You just say so moved.
So moved.
All those in favor of Val's motion?
Is that a good thing? I didn't
The-
understand.
She wasn't at the meeting
Yeah.
and the minutes were approved. I
With-
just didn't get her deleted in all places.
Okay.
And I think what I might have done.
I'll
is
explain everything to you.
Could you?
I will. Yeah, it's,
Google on my part, I didn't get her out of there.
Terry,
It was,
God.
she was in there, she was
Okay.
there. So, it
Okay,
matters.
Now we're good.
I'm good.
Okay.
Now you're good, now you're good.
So we've approved 22nd, and you're, Terry, you're saying hold January 17th, because you need to modify. Okay. Is that all right with you, John?
Discussion in there.
He's good with it.
He's gonna, she's gonna alter the language, and that's that.
And send it, resend it out.
Yeah.
Probably won't even have
The
to
language, put it in French.
put it in
We-
italics. French italics. Will be all there, I can speak for them.
Commission comments, I have one.
Yes.
You say this is my garage, this is my house,
Okay.
and there's hedges here, except for 10 feet of a driveway. And somebody comes in with an application, and they say, well, they go over here, you know? You know, you can see side of the house, but you can't see back where I want to do something. Well, you know, they all come in with these side photos. That's why I wrote down here, need more photos with application submission. Just push them, tell them, you know, because more people come in here and they get an off-side photo, you can't see it from the street or travel away. And my other complaint is, and I complain, we don't use it enough, explain it to the public. The law states visibility from a street, public way, et cetera, right down to the fact that if a subdivision is approved by the planning board, the roads in there are subject to visibility from those roads as well. It's written right in the
Is
law.
that
Been there
right?
for years.
So
Oh,
like
yeah.
the Hawthorne Park, that we're
Same thing.
not judging from walking interior with the big glass,
It doesn't block anything. I looked at that project.
yeah.
You know, you know, as far as that happening right
Okay.
there, it happens in a lot of subdivisions. Oh, you can't see it from the street. Well, that road it goes in to get to your house, that's visible. from
Publicly
there.
traveled way, yeah.
Of course, I'm from the old school, you know that. That's what I stick by. I try to be consistent.
If it's
Yeah, look at the Roberts house. Every window's got a,
a
got a,
row before the
if,
planning board, on the planning board plan.
On
I
Center
motion to
Street?
adjourn if everybody's
On
done.
Center Street?
I just had one last question.
Okay.
Just about the Nantucket discussion, about that district.
Yeah.
When is that gonna come up before us again? When we talk with, the advisory committee about defining what those boundaries are?
It seems to me that we can't have any substantive discussion of his plan until after town meeting. Because it all kind of hinges on what gets approved at town meeting. You know, the zoning thing that he has in there.
If-
Which is what, though?
Well, I could, yeah, if they want the district under their purview to align with
Which
the
is,
zoning map.
which is what they want. Now, we could review it in advance because I am getting a definite sense of the board that the HDC does not want to give them as much as they're interested in taking on that whole thing. Now, keep in mind too, Matthew, that he sort of summed this up. He said, we just, quote, want to have an idea of what the Nantucket Advisory Board's jurisdiction is.
Well, I do think we need to discuss it, though, because it
definitely.
includes, I said, is that gonna mean then, if you're in that district, you're banned from using SDLs, like the old historic district in town, and he said exactly.
Oh, he did?
Yes.
Yeah, this warrants a big discussion. So are you concerned that it's going to be reviewed when you're gone?
Yes.
It won't
Me
be.
too.
It won't be.
Okay.
I'll wait until we have everybody
February
back. Okay.
All
Are
right.
everybody good?
Motion to adjourn.
All right. Thanks, everyone.